Hey guys, this is Frank Yecker, and you're listening to Submission Radio.
Hey, this is Rich Franklin.
What's up, everybody? This is Chris Lieben. This is Diego Sanchez. Randy Couture.
Alistair Overeem.
Hi, this is Stephen Conor.
This is Don Fry.
Hey, I'm Phil, Mr. Wonderful Davis.
TJ Dillashaw.
You're listening to Submission Radio.
Submission Radio. Submission Radio.
Submission Radio.
You're listening to Submission Radio.
Welcome to the special holiday edition of Submission Radio. I hope you're getting ready to get into that turkey eggnog, enjoying that Festivus poll as we have a really fun episode of Submission Radio for you to really celebrate this season, don't we, Cass?
Oh, man. Fun times all around. And we thought, you know what? Let's just have some fun discussions. Let's just break down some fun topics, and it'll be a good, fun way to go out in what has been an amazing year so far, not only for Submission Radio, but MMA in general. So we've got some fun guests to break things down. Robin Black, in case you were lacking in excitement and enthusiasm and energy, we've got Robin Black back on Submission Radio. We're going to be talking and looking to the future, talking about UFC 207, Garbrandt versus Cruz, Rousey versus Nunes. This episode needs to last because we're going to be taking a bit of a break. So he's coming on the show. We've got Sheehan of Severe MMA. I mean, it wouldn't be a big episode without discussion about Conor McGregor and some speculation, what's happening next, and all those kinds of things. We thought, hey, a man from Ireland who has one of the best Irish media outlets when it comes to MMA, we got to have him on. And then we've got Big John Morgan talking about amazing outlets. MMA Junkie, the biggest website for MMA in the world. He is making his first official appearance on Submission Radio. We've spoken to him in the past. We've done post-fight and pre-fight shows with him, but he's going to be on the program, and we're excited. And that's not all. We've got another guest, don't we, Dennis? Oh, and I almost forgot. Before I cut to you, Dennis, we do have another guest, but I forgot to mention Tommy Toehold. How can I forget this? Tommy Toehold, he is always there with us anytime we do some kind of big show, whether it's a holiday special, end of year, Christmas, UFC 205, UFC 202, whatever it is, he's here to get everybody excited about the holidays. So Tommy Toehold has been kind enough, seriously, one of the nicest guys in MMA, kind enough to grace us with his presence yet again.
That's right. A good friend of the program, buffet buddy Elias Cepeda, joins us to talk about this UFC on Fox 22, break down the fights, and really get into this whole new women's featherweight division in the UFC, Cass. I mean, there's some stuff to talk about there. Was Cyborg snubbed? What's going on? And what does the future hold? I mean, we'll be breaking it down and discussing that as well. It's interesting that you mentioned that there'll be a bit of a break. For people that didn't tune in last week where we mentioned it, this is the last episode of Submission Radio for 2016. Like you mentioned, an amazing year for us. We had so much fun, but a big announcement happening. When we do return next year, we are moving the time that the show comes out a little bit. It will now be coming out on Wednesdays in America and Thursdays in Australia. We thought we'd give it a go, have a bit of fun with it. And we will be returning Wednesday on the 11th of January to all our American listeners, and the 12th of January to all our Australian listeners. So get a calendar, get one of those new calendars, maybe something fun, something with some nice ladies on there, and circle the date, because we will be back and we can't wait to return. Even though we still haven't left and there's still one episode left, we're still looking forward to our big return in 2016. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I feel like in that commercial for UFC 207 where Ronda Rousey circles the calendar, she got the date mixed up. She circled December 30th. I don't know what that's all about. She should have been circling January 11th / January 12th. That's the big date. Want to thank you guys, because you guys basically keep the ship floating, and you guys have been really awesome as far as doing your iTunes reviews. We always plug it every week. James Lynch, I know you're listening. You mock it, but have you given us a review? That's the big question. They've been coming in, pouring in, and we read one last week that was simply amazing from the illustrious some guy from Australia. There's a couple of fun ones here. Best MMA podcast around from Yi Ulu from the United Kingdom. This is by far the best MMA podcast around. If I didn't have this podcast on a Monday morning, I don't know what I'd do. Well, Yi Ulu, you're going to have to switch your body clock and basically enjoy us on a Wednesday and or Thursday now. And then from France, again, Benoit Fayol. I live in a seminary and study to become a Catholic priest. In brackets, no joke. MMA is my escape. MMA podcasts are my bedtime stories, and you guys are among my favorite storytellers. Keep it up. In brackets, just checking if you would actually read my comment during your podcast. Well, surprise, surprise, we did, Benoit, and that's the second time he's given us a review. So how about that for dedication? So if you guys keep rolling them in, give as many stars as you think we deserve, we'll keep reading them.
That's right. I'm curious to see what Benoit thinks about our favorite Christmas gifts. Received and given. That's right, guys. A bit of a theme today. We're going to really get into this holiday season and break that down as well. But look, before we jump to our first interview, just a quick reminder, if you still haven't followed us on Twitter, @SubmissionAUS is where the action is. And like us on Facebook. That's facebook.com/SubmissionRadioAUS. Now, Casper, you mentioned it before. It's time to kick up the enthusiasm a notch. We have our next guest on the line, and I believe you're ready to introduce him.
All right, guys. Our next guest is one of the most respected and also exciting analysts in MMA, a rock star, a former fighter himself, inventor of the world-famous SAP Alvarez scale, and many other MMA measurement devices straight out of the Fight Network, the always delightful Robin Black. Welcome back, Robin. Thanks for hanging with us today.
Oh, guys, thanks for having me, man, and thanks for the kind words. That means a lot to me. There was once a time where I was the least respected analyst in MMA, and it's really nice to hear that. Thank you so much.
Wow, times have changed, man. So look, today, seeing as this is the last episode of the year, we're going to borrow your expertise to look to the future and get everybody excited for the end-of-year card, of course, UFC 207. We'll chat about both the main event and the co-main event. Let's start with Dominick Cruz versus Cody Garbrandt. Before we even break down the matchup, Robin, in any way, let's just gauge your excitement levels and what you're thinking about it. Are you a fan of Garbrandt getting the shot so early, or would you have rather him get a couple more fights and a bit more experience under his belt? Do you think he's ready?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I look at it from, let's just say he's got it. Okay, so he's got it, and you're him. What do you do? And the answer is, if you know you're developing and you know that you're going to be better and better and better next year and the year after and forever, and we're young, do we put it off or do we take it? And you're like, fuck it, let's take it, man. Let's go for it. Let's see where we're at. Maybe we can beat this guy. Maybe we do have enough skill to beat him. And if it turns out that we don't, the experience of having fought him is going to equip us so that 2 or 3 years from now, when we get it again, we're going to be that much better. So from the standpoint of, okay, kid, you've got it, that's how I think you got to look at it when you're a young prospect. You got to go for it. And then Cruz, I'm just pumped every time I get to see him fight. Of all the fighters out there, he's in the very tiny handful of fighters I'm the most fascinated by. You know, I've spoken with him a few times, and I've watched him fight, and tried to watch him think, if that makes sense, you know, in doing his other job, and watched him prepare. I was at the Fox Studios for, you know, a day or 2 days, really watching him work and seeing his preparation, getting an idea of his thought process. And he's a fascinating human being, never mind combat athlete. So excitement-wise, based on those things, seeing him fight and getting to see this kid go for it, it's super exciting. As far as you know, should he or shouldn't he, or who should or who shouldn't, you know, obviously I want to see TJ fight him again. But I love the TJ Dillashaw, Dwayne Ludwig thinking. It's like you were upset for a day, maybe a day maximum. Then you accepted the reality that this fight wasn't going to be yours and said, what do we do with that reality? Well, fuck it. Give us the next guy. Give us, who's the tough guy? Lineker, give us him. You know, that's how you do it. You don't throw a temper tantrum and freak out and threaten to quit and all this kind of stuff, because that is going to accomplish nothing. You accept that reality. You may not like it, but you accept it, and you focus on what you can do about it. And what you can do about it is knock out the next guy on the list and then prove it again.
Yeah, that's right, Robin. Well, for the longest time, Garbrandt has said that he's going to knock out Cruz. How likely a scenario do you think it is that he'll be able to achieve this? Because we haven't seen Cruz really hurt badly in a very long time. And of course, you mentioned last time he could have replaced Bob Sapp on your Sapp Alvarez scale as a guy who takes minimal risks in fights and attempts to avoid giving his opponent the opportunity to hurt him. Can Garbrandt do it, or will Cruz be too much?
So you mentioned the Sapp Alvarez scale. There's so many different ways to look at fighting, and the longer you study it, the more, and the different perspectives you take. You know, I was making a puzzle last night with my wife and our in-laws, my in-laws, her parents, and I found that if you rotate around the table and you look at the puzzle in a different way from a different angle, you see it different. You see the pieces different. You see the shapes of the pieces and the textures of the puzzle. You keep changing your perspective, look further away, take a break and come back with fresh eyes. So that's what we do with fighting if you're, you know, on a constant, you know, path of trying to figure it out. And so you find these different things. And a dilemma is an idea where, you know, the relationship between two things creates a dilemma. There's many different styles of dilemma, but, not that long ago, maybe 3 years ago, I was thinking that there was what we could call the Cruz-Lineker dilemma. And that is, the more mobility that you have, the less power that you have. And the more power that you can create, the less mobility that you can have. And that is just on the relationship of these two, the dilemma between these two attributes. So if you think of John Lineker, his feet are attached to the ground, and you see it as he drives off his feet. That's what creates the power in his hip through his core to his upper body as he torques. A Mike Tyson-like style, heavy feet, powerful feet. And he's very attached to the ground. And because he's committed to those shots, he can't move laterally as much, can't move circularly as much. He's not as light on his feet. So there's that dilemma. More power equals less mobility. Then the other side, Cruz, so much mobility because he's so light on his feet, and because he's so light on his feet and he's never holding on to a position, sort of a landmark of a spot for any length of time, he loses power. And so that dilemma, the Cruz-Lineker dilemma, was true 3 or 4 years ago, but it's already untrue. And it is the TJ Dillashaw's and the Cody Garbrandts who have already made the Cruz-Lineker dilemma irrelevant before I even got a chance to go make fancy graphics and do a breakdown about it. Because they've figured out how, and Dwayne would be a guy who could explain this the best, Dwayne Ludwig. They figured out how to use movement to create power. And you see that with Dillashaw, and you see that maybe to a lesser extent, but you see it with Garbrandt, where if you step hard, and this was what Dwayne showed me, just stand in an orthodox stance and step hard with your right foot while throwing a right hand, you've used movement to create power. Or stand in a southpaw position and then step back into orthodox and crank your hook, you've used movement to create power. So that dilemma is already been shattered by these guys. So what do you get instead? You get somebody who is a little more powerful than old Dominick Cruz, and it doesn't apply to Dom either. You saw him drop Faber with these very he used movement and timing and mobility to create power. So it already doesn't apply to him. But that is what Garbrandt does. He uses this footwork to generate power. So he has more power, in his case much more, than the old school Cruz, who incidentally also has power. New school Cruz has more power than old school Cruz because of these principles. He also has more mobility than old school Lineker. You know what I mean? They found the way to, rather than as mobility goes up, power goes down, and as power goes up, mobility goes down. They've found the way to maintain one and or raise it without having to lower the other one and be able to raise that as well. So this is part of what Dwayne Ludwig and TJ Dillashaw have pioneered, but Garbrandt has a piece of that as well. So what you end up with, like I said, I tangent out some of this stuff as much as I get the root in my research. The working it out, the verbalizing it comes when I speak to my friends like you guys. You get to talk around it. So what we see is a Garbrandt who has the power to hurt him and has the mobility to possibly catch him. And I think the long and the short of what we've got to is the very same question we started with. Can he catch him? And I think the answer is he has a lot more ability to do so than we might have thought. And even despite that, I think Dominick Cruz is way too far ahead in the evolutionary sort of flow chart of fighting. And I think there is certainly a chance Garbrandt can touch him hard. But, we could see 25 minutes and he doesn't touch him at all still, because as he develops more, Dom continues to develop too. So it's these kind of things that fascinate me. But if you throw them all away, or you just absorb the things that we're kind of aware of when we look at it, and you say to me, can he catch him? I'm like, probably not. He probably can't,
Wow. We feel lucky here because I feel like what we just got is essentially a preview of what your breakdown, Robin's breakdown, is going to be when you inevitably do it for this fight, whether it's going to be for the UFC or for the Fight Network. But I got one more question about this fight, and then we got to move on because we've only got about, 15 minutes left, and we still got one more massive fight to talk about. We've seen a lot of trash talk between the two, Cruz and Garbrandt. Cruz is really no stranger to that, and we know that generally doesn't let him affect his performances. Garbrandt, he recently got pretty heated when Cruz had a bit of back and forth with his girlfriend over Instagram. How much do you think the emotions will play a factor in this one? And are there any other X factors that you see here, Robin?
Yeah, great question. Emotionally, I don't think you can put Dom in a state he doesn't want to be in. If there's going to be some emotional involvement on his part, it's because he recognizes it'll keep him sharp or it'll work for him. He's so experienced and he's so smart, and he understands this game on levels that very few human beings do understand it. I dedicate my whole life, 60 hours a week for 10 years, maybe more, and my spare time to trying to analyze all the different layers of this. And I still am way far behind catching up. And he has to train it and fight it and do 5 other jobs and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Guys like him are still out front. We're still trying to figure out the levels that they're seeing and understanding the sport. So I just don't think you can, something as he's 5 years past being able to be drawn into something emotional unless he acknowledges it's a value to him. Whereas on the other hand, you've got a young, hungry kid who his emotions have been a part of him getting there. So I don't think he can resist his emotions. I think they are a part of him until he learns that they shouldn't be. And so if there's an emotional disadvantage here, it's 100% for the kid. And especially you start playing with people's girlfriends and things like that. And, it's hard. It's one thing to watch a podcast or to listen to somebody or to talk to a sports psychologist once or twice, and they say, you can't let emotions get the best of you. And any commentator can say that, or anybody, a fan can, he can't get emotional. But the reason you get emotional is because we don't always have control over our thoughts and emotions, and that applies to every one of us. That's a skill. That's a life skill that you work on for a long time. And Cody Garbrandt's emotions have been very valuable to him, so he may not have worked on controlling them. When you're young, it's even harder. So I think that'll be a disadvantage to him. I think that's the biggest X factor. Are there others? There always are. Is somebody injured? Is it possible that Dominick Cruz can when there's a new school or a new generation of people, you can underestimate, what they can do. Wonder Boy, it's not a new thing, but it's with Tyron Woodley's growth and his incredible physical attributes and skills. Wonder Boy underestimated the speed with which he could close distance. That's one example. You make one underestimation with somebody who your game is not getting hit, and you suddenly get hit early, and the whole thing can change. So it's a great fight. It's a beautiful, beautiful fight. In a perfect world, TJ Dillashaw just shows us another level on that night, and then he goes in there and either rematches Cruz, or suddenly we have a new interesting scenario with him and a kid that they used to train with. So I'm interested and I'm excited for Ronda's return, but this is what my kind of main event of the night is.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, Robin. Big main events, both people looking big fights. I mean, people looking forward to the Amanda Nunes, Ronda Rousey fight. For a lot of people, this is the main event as well. But let's touch on that Ronda Rousey, Amanda Nunes fight. I mean, earlier this year when we had you on the show, you said you believed that Ronda wasn't likely to ever come back. What do you think about her decision to come back? And were you surprised that she did? What do you make of it all?
I think that's great. I think it's there would have been, just imagine, put yourself, be empathetic and put yourself in that state. And try your best. It's hard for us to imagine. We can't imagine, what it's like. I met Justin Bieber in Los Angeles just on a random scenario where it was him and a bouncer and not very many people. And I've met his father, so I spoke to him. And what I saw in him was fear and discomfort and a real suspicion of everyone he spoke to, because the world has taught him to be suspicious. Everybody wants something, or they're out to get him, or, people might spit on you or say things. Everywhere you turn, people are either saying great things about you, or they want a picture with you, or they're laughing because you got kicked in the head and knocked unconscious. I'm talking about Ronda now, not Bieber. But these people's lives are not something we can really, truly imagine. You see Ronda or someone like that for a moment, and you say, oh, well, I could handle that if I had millions of dollars and a UFC title. A couple of people saying they hate you, but her world is surrounded unless she blocks it out, by people pointing fingers and making fun of her, and the pain of that, and all the gossip and the chatter, and so all of that, plus being embarrassed and having all these other options, I figured she would, I would not have been surprised if she never fought again. And I'm pleasantly surprised and happy for her that she is. assuming that this goes all the way, I have this sneaking feeling that there may be a chance that fight doesn't happen for some reason, an injury or something. It's just a possibility in my mind.
Rousey Nunes?
Yeah. It's one of those possibilities in my mind, whether it's because you want it so bad and you got so much to prove that you overtrain and you get injured, or your mind starts playing tricks. I hope for her sake that she does. But fight itself, let's look at how much our perspective plays into something. So just, if you will, block out the existence of Holly Holm and that fight. Okay? So try to remember who you were and what your perspective told you and what you knew about Ronda Rousey if you block that out. You had just seen her take out an Olympic silver medalist with knees to the sternum. You'd seen her knock out somebody in Brazil in a stadium, and you felt, the true marvel as Rogan and other experts all over the world were saying they'd never seen anything because they never had. That's still real. That feeling. You had the feeling as she knocked out Alex Davis and threw her limp body through the air onto the mat, and over and over. And if you remove Holly Holm from the scenario, and I say to you, I think Amanda Nunes has a good shot against Ronda Rousey, you call me a shill. You call me a liar. You say, oh my God, look at this stupid shill, the UFC nut hugger, because he's trying to convince us. Like, you would never in a million years believe Amanda Nunes had a shot. If you can put yourself into the state, the perception, the you that believed what you believed before that. Do you agree? If you remember the moments you looked, I mean, I was telling people Holly Holm was going to win that fight, and people mocked me openly that I was, a shill and just there to try to get, you just trying to sell pay-per-views, bro. You know what I mean? Nobody would have believed Amanda Nunes had a shot if you remove Holly Holm. Do you agree?
Yeah. Oh, we thought Holly Holm was going to lose. So, yeah, you're talking to two guys who predicted it completely wrong.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then, but now we can never unsee Holly beating her up, Ronda bloodied up with her eyes wide open in her corner, saying nonsense to her and her heart racing, and then getting kicked in the head in front of her. We can never unsee that. That we've seen now. And the big thing is Amanda Nunes has seen it too. That's the big thing. Because Amanda Nunes now, all of these things. There's 100 examples. Tony Hawk did, I don't know what the number is. Let's say it was 5 rotations on a skateboard, whatever. There's a 360 times 4, 1700 or 1540 or whatever the hell it was. He did something they said could never be done by any people. By any human. Now it's normal. Everybody does it. In figure skating, in Olympic or World Championship figure skating, the quad was unachievable. After it was done, everybody did it that year. And then now it's normal even on sort of a college level. Like as you come out, the quad is normal. Once human beings see that something is possible, it changes everything. So all of whoever Ronda fights next has seen that. They've seen her collapse to the ground with her face swollen, and they've seen her corner melt down, and they've seen her not, panic. So it changes the dynamic of everything. And now that's on Ronda to find the answer. Ronda she's not going to beat Amanda Nunes with a myth. She's not going to beat her with her aura. She's not going to beat her with her, the feeling of her confidence or getting into her head. She's got to beat her physically. With skills and the armbar and striking and wrestling and judo, and she's got to beat her that way. Can she beat her that way? Absolutely, positively. If she's on top of her game, she can. But it's now a question of a woman with skills versus a woman with skills, because everything has changed now. And you fought Ronda a certain way, but at the same time, that's still the woman who can knee you twice and throw you through the air and you're unconscious. So however, the X's and O's and the apples and oranges of this fight, we can take whatever video clip we want, and whether it's, Jack Slack or Dan Hardy or Robin Black or any of now 50 people who look at the technical can sit there and say Ronda does this, and when she gets the overhook, she steps over here like this. But all of it's bullshit. All of it's bullshit. It's all going to be figured out by the mind of these people and what happens when they go and they fight. We don't know what Ronda does now. We don't know how she steps or where she puts her head or how she covers up. because for 13 months she's changed. She's a different human being. So that when you really think of it that way, a part of you could go, well, now we know nothing. And the other part of you can go, good, we know nothing. Now we have to go see a beautiful fight. And there's a beauty in dispelling some of these myths and leaving you with, oh my God, after I talk to somebody who supposedly knows about fighting, now I know even less about how this fight's going. And part of me wants to take analysis, at least for a while, in an experimental way in that direction. Show you how much bullshit we have been selling and showing and sharing, and show you that there's even more randomness in fighting than we ever thought. And the more we learn, the less we should be confident we know what's going on.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And you mentioned their minds. I think one of the biggest questions in this fight, I mean, we know both women's skill sets. I think one of the biggest questions is Ronda Rousey's mindset and mental headspace going into this fight. And I want to ask you something, because you, I believe, were one of the first people to mention that apparently Ronda Rousey had to be consoled after her stare down with Amanda back in New York. It definitely made a lot of headlines. I wanted to sort of ask you, because I don't know if you were there in person. I thought you weren't in New York, but I want to sort of ask you, what do you make of that? What do you attribute to that? Was it true? What are your thoughts?
Well, I was not there. And I talked about it sort of in passing on, I don't remember if it was Mentality of Combat Sports or 5 Rounds. And I just mentioned it. And maybe it was you guys who picked up and said, hey, this guy said this happened. Now, Dave Meltzer, who is one of the most stable and reliable and people out there, he confirmed it. So that, that made me feel better about it. But I did not witness it. What I was passing on is I heard this happen. I can't say where I heard, but it was a pretty credible source. And Meltzer said, yes, I was there, and it did happen. So she went up on stage. She got herself emotional, wound up. You could see it as she marched off. Now, when you talk about observing emotional expression as a reflection of mindset, it's tough, because first you have to accept that certain people do have more expertise than others in this, and that's not something quantifiable. So all I can tell you is, because I thin slice that long enough in connection to understanding mindset through working with psychology professors and sports psychologists, to me, it felt authentically emotional. But a person can stride off stage just to make a point or to sell a pay-per-view. But to me, it felt authentic. When I found out later that she was emotional and her coach had to kind of hug her and make her feel better, and that was witnessed by Dave Meltzer, a super credible guy, that didn't surprise me, because it did feel real to support what I had heard. There's a lot you can make of that. I don't think evidence hasn't seemed to show that she is led by the best people, and I don't mean that off the cuff. And I'm very hesitant to criticize. I don't know if you've ever noticed that about me. I will gladly criticize the media and almost no one else. Because, I can criticize that which I know. And I don't criticize fighters, and I don't criticize coaches too often. Maybe when they miss weight sometimes, but that's a part of the culture. So even Edmund, who people are freely trying to criticize, I hesitate to do that. However, let's just put it this way, that we haven't seen any evidence of really high-level coaching. We've seen evidence of him in Travis Brown's corner being emotional in ways that were not useful to Travis Brown. We've seen, him say things to his fighter that didn't seem right. And although sometimes good coaches with good relationships will lie to their fighter for a purpose, this didn't seem like that. So there's not been evidence that necessarily sometimes you have a yes man who says the things you want to hear. And for someone like Ronda Rousey, who was so dominant, it worked. But when it stops working, it's an iffy thing, because you can take, if really just being back in front of this crowd, many of whom are hateful to her, and being back in the spotlight and being back under the pressure, if we can identify that that's difficult, we can start with small pressure situations. We can start with small crowds. We can purposefully acclimatize her to that pressure and do it a little at a time and a little at a time. She hasn't seemed to do that. And that concerns me, when all of a sudden you are standing in a cage again, and if you haven't addressed your fears and your feelings of being human and your feelings of being vulnerable and and how badly you felt after that knockout. If you've suppressed that and pushed it down into some hidden spot, it's going to pop back up. The way for athletes or any of us to deal with something is to acknowledge it, explore it, study it, deal with your reactions to it, and put in the work of it. So I haven't seen that that's been the case, but I'm not around her. Maybe daily, maybe for months and months and months, this has been part of her dealing with the scenario to put us, because what we're asking somebody to do at this level is be in the most high pressure situations, danger situations, emotionally unstable situations, and perform at the highest level. Whatever anyone listening to this does well, maybe you're a good piano player, maybe you're good at tennis, maybe, you're a good video game player, whatever. If we ask you to do it in front of 1 million people all watching on live TV now or never, none of us can do that. Because that is a whole different world, and it's something you need to create in yourself, the ability to do it. Once that's gone, like it has been, or at least temporarily was after home, the question is, has she addressed the mental training and the self-study and the growth necessary to step in there and do it again? If she has, she can absolutely beat this woman either early in the fight or in round 3 or 4. And there's been clues saying that maybe she is strategizing to take it there, which would be really interesting. If she hasn't dealt with that, expect her to come out for 2 holy hell minutes and then it go terrible. And I hope it's the former. I hope she comes out and does well. And most of us can never understand the kinds of things she's been through just as a life, and those, I'm often more interested in the fight itself, but then there are times like this where I'm interested in the person and I'm interested in her journey. I mean, there haven't been many people walk the path that she's walked.
Yeah, certainly. And then obviously the other perspective from Amanda Nunes, who headlined UFC 200, got a taste of being a big focal point and being on a big time card, and having the emotion of walking out and being the main event for, what the UFC regarded as one of the biggest pay-per-views of all time. So her having also dealt with that mentally maybe gets her a little bit prepared for a huge moment against Ronda Rousey. Now, Robin, before we let you go, because we know you got to go in a minute, you're a busy, busy man. As you know, this is the last episode of Submission Radio for the year. Christmas is coming up. There's a bit of a theme going on this episode. We're quickly asking all of our guests, over the holiday season, whether it's Hanukkah, Christmas, whatever it is people celebrate, what is the best present that you've ever received in your life, something tangible, and the best present that you've ever given? I know you're a man that likes to go into detail, so break it down for us. Best present you've ever given and the best present that you've ever received.
Wow, that's a really hard one. Really hard. Because, I mean, I can't even think of present. To me, like, I'm not an objects guy. So I'm trying to think of experiences maybe that I've had or experiences that I've got as a gift, because there's no real object that really interests me that much. I can't think of anything. Is there any chance my wife will hear this before Christmas?
Yeah. She listens to the show every day, right?
Yes, she does. Okay, I'm going to tell her not to listen to this show on any level.
All right.
I'm just going to say the Submission Radio is not something that anyone should listen to. But I bought my wife a trip to Las Vegas for January 4th as the gift. So I feel like
2017, right? This is upcoming?
Yeah. Yes, January 4th. 17. So on Christmas Day, when she opens her presents, one of them will be, let's take off in a week and go to Las Vegas. Wow. While I'm there, I'm going to meet with some people at the UFC, but that's besides the point. I'm going to take...
You're like Ari Gold, business even during pleasure.
Yeah. I mean, they blend for me. This is pleasure. I'm hanging out with my friends from Australia chatting. This is not... And they all blend. It's all life. It's not working life and home life and social life. It's just all life. But as far as the best present I've ever received, I honestly really don't know. Like, mostly the things that I appreciate the most are advice and insight and lessons in life. I really do. I mean, Actually, I know the best gift I've ever received in any level. I know it off the top of my head. Joe Rogan called Dana White and said, "You should hire this guy. He should work for us." That's the most important gift anybody has ever given me.
Wow.
Rogan called Dana White, said, "Hire this guy, bring him on. He does really unique work, and we should have him." And that's how I ended up contributing stuff for the UFC. And off the top of my mind, I mean, I'm sure there's a blowjob out there that beats that or something, but off the top of my head, that is definitely the best gift I've ever received. And no matter where Joe is in the world, if he stops doing the UFC in a few years or whatever, I'll always appreciate that forever. And no matter what other things come up and wherever my path will lead me, I'm never going to forget that guy did that for me.
Wow. Well, I'll tell you what, a little gift for us was having you on the program this week. Guys, make sure to check out Robin on Twitter at Robin Black MMA. A lot of exciting breakdowns coming up with UFC 207. Thank you for giving us a taste, Robin. Happy holidays. Thanks for being on the program. Thanks for always being such an awesome part of Submission Radio. And enjoy that trip with your wife. We'll make sure she doesn't listen to this program. None of the listeners tweet her. Nobody tweet her. This needs to stay secret until January, everybody.
Yes, please. Absolutely. And thanks, guys. It is always a pleasure. And I rushed home through a snowstorm to get here to chat with you guys because I don't want to miss it. Let me add one thing. I know I'm the one who has to get off, but my mother-in-law isn't here yet. So let me tell you this. You know, there's this weird, speaking of Joe, people are always like, well, now that we've heard that Goldie's leaving, nobody's ever said that Mike Goldberg was leaving. And like, this is the insight into how we project meaning and project what things mean. So somewhere along the line, Dana said he had an idea for a dream team with Joe and somebody else. Whoever that guy is, that doesn't mean Mike would be gone. Mike would work with Brian Stan. The interesting thing that I've learned by kind of penetrating the business of any kind, and UFC firsthand, but every business is like this. Nobody takes somebody from the bottom and plops them at the top. So I get the odd Twitter message or something where people are like, Robin Black should replace Joe Rogan if he leaves. First of all, I hope Joe never leaves. And second of all, that would never happen. Brian Stan would move up from the number 2 to the number 1, and Dan or Kenny or any of the other people would move up to that spot, and they'll bring somebody up the bottom. So if Joe ever leaves, Robin Black wants to be number 5. You know what I mean? But it's same thing. It's like just because you might bring somebody in to do the 10 shows a year Joe does, doesn't mean like Goldberg's gone. Goldberg moves to work with Stan, and John Anik gets a bit of a break because he has to do 40 weekends a year. He only does 30. I mean, these things are never, people think everything's absolute. Somebody gets knocked out, they should retire. Their next fight, they knock somebody out, that guy should retire. We make these enormous leaps based on things, and it's just, that's a weird one. That one struck me weird. When I brought up Joe, I thought, I haven't mentioned this odd perspective or this odd perception that I've had anywhere. And it's just the weirdest thing in the world to me that people think if somebody brought in another guy, that would mean that guy would leave and that his boss would say that publicly.
It is funny how sort of, you know, everybody's mind works. And I mean, I completely understand like why people would think that, but I don't know. I guess time will tell, right? Who knows what the future will bring in 2017. We'll let you go, Robin, because we know you got to go. The mother-in-law's coming, and we've got more people to speak to as well. But, Robin, we can't express how much of a pleasure it's been chatting with you. Always and once again. And we look forward to doing it plenty more times in 2017.
Happy New Year.
Awesome. You too, Robin. Have a good one,
Robin.
Bye-bye. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
This is Chael Sonnen, and you are listening to Submission Radio.
All right, guys, we're very happy to have the following man back on the program. You know him from Severe MMA, Sherdog.com, and, of course, the amazing Severe MMA podcast. Sean Sheehan, welcome back to Submission Radio. Thanks for joining us, man.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me back. It's great to be back.
It is always a pleasure. Now, right now we're enjoying a nice Australian summer. Before we get into it, describe the weather down there in Ireland. What kind of temperature are you dealing with leading into Christmas?
I'm actually freezing cold as we speak right now. We're hitting the depths of winter now. I think there's like a big there's a big storm actually supposed to come tonight, so there's going to be a lot of rain and stuff, and you know it's frosty every night. We're about 1 or 2 degrees Celsius, maybe a little bit above that.
Wow.
But it hasn't been too bad actually this year, and I don't think it wasn't too bad last year. But I think over the next week now we're going to get it pretty bad. So yeah, it's just terrible. We're just praying for March here, really.
Do you guys? Sorry to cut in. Do you guys do the warm beer? Because I know when I visit family back in Poland, they do warm beer, like literally hot beer to keep themselves warm. Do you guys do that in Ireland, or is that a bit of a no-no?
We don't, but I'd try it.
Years try ago, any beer, wouldn't you, Sean?
I would. Years ago, they used to heat Guinness and drink it. Like people used to have, a range, like I don't know what you call it, like a stove in your kitchen, and you just put bottles of Guinness on top of it and heat it up and drink it like that. But that doesn't really happen anymore. But I don't know. Guinness can actually be drank hot or cold. So I think in Africa they drink it a lot as well. So it's hard to keep things cold out there, I suppose as well. But we try a bit of venting over here. As long as it's free.
Yeah. I love it. That's a big like MMA media thing. We'll take anything that's free. We'll eat it. It could be a big pretzel at 5 a.m. in Madison Square Garden at UFC 205. I'll be dipping that pretzel, walking around the room and talking to everybody. But let's get into it. Because speaking of UFC 205, we kind of spoke to you last time right before UFC 205. Of course, the big question then was what will be next for Conor McGregor. And now as we approach the end of the year, it's still pretty much the same question. What will be happening with McGregor next? Now, before we get into telling us what your thoughts on what's going to be happening with McGregor next are, I want to get your take on the state of the featherweight division since Conor's been stripped of his title. Now that Max Holloway is interim champion, I mean, some people were saying the division's looking a little bit funny at the moment. What's your take since UFC 206, seeing Max win that title and some of the back and forth that him and Jose Aldo have had?
Yeah, well, look, the actual title itself, I think everyone pretty much agrees that it was a joke making it, really. They made it just to have a title on top of UFC 206. But with that said, Max Holloway is a genuine champion in the UFC, I think. And by genuine champion, I mean he has the genuine quality to be a champion. He has the background. He has the resume to be a champion. He deserves it. And I think it's a little bit of a pity. I actually think it would have been better for him to have no belt on the line there and to fight Jose Aldo and, either win the belt or whatever. But I think it's a pity for him more than anything else. Now, if you're looking ahead to that Jose Aldo fight, I think that's a fantastic fight. When people leave divisions to retire or go to another organization or whatever, and they're as big as Conor. Now, we've never had anyone as big as Conor McGregor, but when some people, when Chuck Liddell maybe falls away, or when Rampage left, or when Anderson Silva goes, it's good to have someone to fill the void. And I think this is a fantastic fight to fill that void. And I know it's obviously going to be very hard to fill a void left by Conor McGregor because he's the biggest star in the sport. But fight wise, I think this is just a tremendous fight. I always pick against Max Holloway, and I like that might sound bad, but I really like him. I think he's a really good fighter. But this is a tough fight. Jose Aldo is one of the greatest fighters to ever live. Undoubtedly. If you take away that McGregor knockout, which I know you can't take it away, but if you do, just look at everything else he's done. Beat Frankie Edgar twice, beat Chad Mendez, Ricardo Lamas, all these guys basically with ease. He's beaten all these guys. He's a fantastic fighter. Max Holloway is the coming man as well. Probably the most improved fighter over the last 2 or 3 years. So when you have the two of those meeting, and you look at the featherweight division, like that's not bad. When you look at the states of other divisions, like maybe light heavyweight, you've a couple of guys at the top, but you can't put those fights together, and they're not happening. And welterweight is struggling maybe a little bit since GSP left. I know there's good guys there as well, but there aren't maybe the names that guys like Aldo and Holloway maybe kind of have after because of McGregor. Maybe they've kind of been elevated up, and we see other divisions which have good fighters, but maybe won't have the excitement that this fight will bring. So I think that's probably good for everyone going forward.
Mm-hmm. And sort of speaking about Jose Aldo, even though he's been considered a pound for pound best fighter in the past and still should be, and rightfully so, and he's coming off an impressive victory over Frankie Edgar, Aldo never beat Conor McGregor for the title, and for a lot of fans that's taken away a bit of credibility from who the real champion is. Is there a way, in your opinion, that Aldo can sort of get some of that credibility back outside of rematching McGregor?
I don't think he lost any credibility, to be honest. Okay, he lost credibility as a champion, fair enough, but as a fighter, I don't think he could have any more credibility. He's just a fantastic fighter. And people kind of, it's funny, when McGregor got stripped of the title or relinquished it or whatever, people's opinions kind of changed. If you look back to a week before McGregor got the 145 pound title win from McGregor, people were like, this guy has to be stripped. You know, he's taken 10 months off. He hasn't fought there in a year. He has to be stripped. The division has to move on. And that happened. And then everyone was like, oh, Aldo's not the real champion. You know, McGregor is the real champion. He's the proper champion. And it's like, you can't win everywhere. Look, Aldo came in and he beat Frankie Edgar for the interim title. McGregor isn't coming back to 145 anytime soon. So for me, Aldo is the genuine champion. Now, what diluted all this was making that interim belt that should never have been made, because you can't call someone a champion one day and then 2 minutes later on the same show say there's an interim belt for the division which a guy 2 minutes earlier had just been made champion. You know, you can't do that. So it just looks bad for everyone. But for me, Jose Aldo, he's the champion at 145. He beat Frankie Edgar. McGregor's not there anymore. You know, you kind of have to just move on. He's a fantastic fighter. He deserves it. And, you know, if he's going to fight Max Holloway in February, I believe. So if that happens, you know, all this talk will probably end there anyway, because if he beats Max Holloway, there's no doubting him.
Well, Aldo has said that he wants to move up in weight to fight McGregor in the future. Does that make sense to you? And do you expect we'll ever see a rematch between the two?
Look, if Aldo truly wants it, he can get it. You know, people talk a lot about, oh, I want this McGregor fight, you know. You can go out and get that fight. If like I've said, I've been very vocal about it on Twitter. If Aldo really wanted to fight McGregor, he'd move up to lightweight and he'd call out Habib and he'd fight Habib and have himself as the featherweight champion and the number one contender at lightweight. So McGregor can literally go nowhere. He makes himself basically the number one contender to fight McGregor at both weights in which he fights. He could do that if he wants. Now, that's a risky strategy, fair enough, but that's how people get these big things. That's how McGregor did it. You know, he's taking risks all over, fighting Nate Diaz on short notice, fighting him again, you know, fighting for the lightweight belt. He could have just stayed at featherweight and fought out, you know, all the contenders there. But he chose not to, and, you know, it's paying dividends for him. If Jose Aldo really wants that fight, he can go out and get it. But, look, I don't know. Jose Aldo has spoken a lot about moving up to lightweight. I remember I did an article before Aldo and McGregor fought, and I look back at McGregor fought Joseph Duffy and lost him on the same week that Jose Aldo was given the UFC title. And on that week, Aldo was talking about moving up to lightweight to fight, you know, to take one fight before defending his featherweight title and getting into the featherweight division. Like, this has been talked about for ages and ages. We all remember that weight cut video that came out of Aldo, you know, struggling to cut weight badly, and there was talk of it then again, and it just never happened. Like, it's very hard to believe. You know, at the start when McGregor said he was going to move it up to lightweight as well, I found it very hard to believe, because most people talk about it but they never actually do it. So, you know, I'll believe it when I see it, to be honest. But if he really, really does want that McGregor fight, that's what he should do, because I don't think McGregor's coming down to 145 anytime soon.
All right, well, let's talk about the other interesting thing that's happened recently, and that's obviously this whole Conor McGregor boxing license. What do you think was the real reason he's pursuing it, or should we say them? Because there's, you know, he's applied for multiple licenses. Is it a negotiation ploy, or do you think he actually plans on having a boxing match?
I think there's three things at play here. I think first of all, if people read the article John Nash wrote about, like, the first step to kind of getting out of your UFC,
was awesome. That was so good.
Yeah, and this is the first step to doing that. So probably if people listen to this, go and read that. It'll explain it better than I can. But I'd be 50-50 on that, maybe even a little bit less. I don't think it is, but I think it's a good sign to show it, you know, to go forward and look, you know, to say to kind of the people in charge that I'm planning things, and if things go my way, you know, I'm prepared for it. The second thing is, I think he wants to fight Floyd Mayweather. I think he genuinely does, and if he gets an opportunity, he wants to be able to do it. So applying for a boxing license, you know, is a good way of doing that. If he can come to an agreement with Floyd, with Dana White or whatever, he definitely wants that fight. You know, that's the biggest money fight for him. And the third reason, I think, is to just send a message basically to the UFC. You know, to say that I have other options. I don't need the UFC to succeed. after UFC 205, we all saw him at that press conference sit down and say, I want talks with the UFC brass. I want to share in the company. I want more pay. And it's smart that what he's doing. Dana White even said it. He was asked why McGregor applied for a boxing license, and he said he's good at staying in the news. And yeah, he's good at staying in the news, but he's staying in the news for the right reason. He's getting people talking about him. He's getting people talking, okay, does McGregor have other options? Is he going to go to boxing? Can the UFC have the pull to keep him? So, he's from someone who's, covered McGregor for a long time, especially, through his UFC run. It's just amazing how much intelligent stuff he does and things he comes up with, to keep people talking and to keep himself moving forward. It's just amazing. I think this was another masterstroke, and it's basically filling out a farm. So, you have to hand it to him.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that article by John S. Nash, and really, if you haven't read it, go to Bloody Elbow, go check out that article. It really was. It sort of outlines how, theoretically, from a legal perspective, Conor McGregor could potentially fight Floyd Mayweather. Do you think in some ways, I mean, with all this talk about equity and fighters' rights, etc., in a lot of ways, Conor McGregor could be the key to this puzzle, or the key to this lock, where imagine if he did go fight Floyd Mayweather, imagine the domino effect that would have on how fighters and people in general perceive these UFC contracts. Do you think Conor McGregor could sort of be a key in all this, where to fight Floyd Mayweather would be bigger than just, doing a really, really big fight and making a lot of money? It would sort of stand for a lot of other things.
I think from the UFC's point, that's probably what they're thinking of, and that's probably why they don't want to do it, because they'd probably earn a lot of money off of this if it happened. Obviously that contract is still there, and they'd have to be compensated in some way. But it takes a special fighter to make a special fight like this. It takes two special fighters. And if you're looking at it from the UFC's point of view, you're thinking, who else can do that? They have some great fighters, and we speak about those fighters, and you speak about them in the podcast every week. I do as well. But there's really no one else like McGregor. Maybe Ronda Rousey could do it, but the state of women's boxing isn't in a place at the moment where that it makes sense to make a huge fight, or any other sport, kickboxing or whatever. But McGregor's really the only one. I don't think there's some great fighters. If John Jones did it, would it have the same pop? I'm not sure. Demetrius Johnson, don't think so. Dominick Cruz, Conor, Aldo. No, I don't think there's anyone else. Only McGregor. So it's a precedent that they don't want set. But I think if it was kind of maybe not a co-promotion, but if they were compensated for letting him go, I don't think it would set a bad precedent, to be honest. Now, I think they're worried it would, but I don't think it actually would. Having said that, I just can't see them letting it happen. But getting out of the contract is going to take a long time. John Nash in that article, I think it's a couple of years maybe. I haven't read it now in a while, but it takes a long time to get out of that. And I know he's sitting on the sidelines for 10 months, but McGregor's a guy who likes to be active. He likes to fight. He likes to earn the money. He always spoke about getting as much money as he could, as quickly as he could, and then getting straight out. And it's very hard to see him sitting on the sidelines for that long and not fighting.
All right. Well, speaking of that, I mean, a lot of people are still trying to figure out who's the next person to get a crack at McGregor. We've got Nate Diaz, who's waiting in the wings for a rubber match. We've also got the winner of Ferguson and Khabib when that fight comes together. Where do you lean as the next big return fight for McGregor? Who do you think should be fighting him next?
God, it's really a tough one. The first one that pops to mind is more than likely the winner of Khabib versus Tony Ferguson. I think people look at this fight and think, oh, neither guy is really that big of a draw. Is McGregor going to take them on? They're not going to make a big number, not going to make this a big fight. But he fought Eddie Alvarez in his last fight, and Eddie Alvarez is a great fighter, and we all know what Eddie Alvarez brings, but he's not a big draw. He's not a big name on pay-per-view anyway, and he still did it. I think whoever McGregor fights, he can draw big numbers against him. Now, if he really wants to draw huge astronomical numbers, I think Diaz is probably the fight to make, and I think it's between one of them. I think it's either Diaz or the winner of Khabib and Tony Ferguson, but I actually don't think there's that much of a difference between the two fights. If McGregor can, say if he can get this in New York, we'll say Habib wins. If he fights Habib in New York, I think they can make that a huge card again, make it like it was the last time, you know, take it to the next level, and it's going to be huge again. To be honest, I think that's the way they probably go. You hear Dana White speaking about it, and he says that he doesn't want Nate Diaz to fight McGregor again. It doesn't make sense. That fight, you know, Diaz is a great fighter, and obviously he beat McGregor, and it's 1-on-1. But if you're looking at it, and I think they're trying to kind of get the divisions back to where they used to be, you know, with kind of the champion and the contenders. And if you do that, you're kind of mixing that all up again. Now, personally, that's probably the fight I'd like to see most. Although the Habib fight is unbelievable as well, but I think that's the way the UFC are maybe leaning, and you know, they probably nixed that for a while. You hear Nate last week, I think he kind of alluded to that he might be getting back to it soon, or, you know, might be thinking about getting back to it. But then he said, "Oh, and he want to fight McGregor." But, you know, there's you could see Diaz popping up against someone else maybe and calling out McGregor again. To be honest, I think that's the best way of doing it. And if he does that, you know, that fight definitely could happen. But to be honest, if I was to call it, I'd say the winner of Habib versus Ferguson.
Now, one thing I wanted to ask, though, is about John Kavanagh mentioning how Diaz is sort of he is the guy that makes the most sense. What did you make of that? Is that sort of more posturing, more sort of throwing things out there so that Khabib and Tony Ferguson sort of fight for this harder, or do you think he generally believes that, and that's sort of a sign that maybe the McGregor camp and the McGregor team is leaning towards the Diaz fight?
You know, I think if they had the choice, they would take the Diaz fight because there's a thing with McGregor. Okay, he wants to earn all the money, and that's, as I said earlier, that's the money fight. That's the biggest fight. But there's still a little bit left in that. You know, as I said, it's 1-on-1. They both have a win, and I think they're looking at it from the basis that, you know, the second fight was a close fight. You know, Nate could have won that fight. I think I had McGregor winning. I think most people had McGregor winning, but you know, it was a close fight, and I think they want to seal off that, you know, that rivalry, and they maybe want to get a finish against Nate Diaz or something like that. You know, it's hard to know what way they're looking at it from. Like, McGregor is a guy who always wants to take that challenge, and he, you know, remember when he fought Holloway, and he tore his ACL, was in the second round, and he took him down. He won the fight. He won all 3 rounds, and after it, he said, you know, I'm sickened I couldn't get the finish. You know, he's going around with half his leg hanging off, you know, and he's going mad. And that's the kind of guy he is. You know, he was probably sickened after that fight that he didn't finish Diaz. You know, he was obviously happy when he got the decision, but in the cold light of day, he was probably thinking, I should have finished Diaz. You know, that's what I came to do. You know, he had him hurt in the first couple of rounds, but you know, it kind of stepped away because of what happened in the first fight. And maybe he's thinking, you know, if I wasn't like that back down at lightweight, I could finish him. So you never know how he's thinking. And I think that's probably the way he's looking at it. And obviously there is the money thing as well. So, you know, John Kavanagh is a guy who speaks about, you know, he was an engineer. You know, he's a mathematician. He's a guy who likes fixing equations. You know, he likes getting the right result. And I think they'd like to have the Diaz fight again, so they could make it, you know, they could get the finish and they could leave no doubt at all about it. But you know, it's tough to see him, just because of what Dana White has said. It's tough to see him making that fight.
It's going to be interesting if that fight does come together, a storyline there for the belt perhaps. Now, Sean, before we let you go, a bit of a theme this week. It's the last episode of the year, so we're asking people what their favorite Christmas presents have been. There's 2 questions, really. What is the greatest Christmas gift you believe you've ever given? And what is the greatest Christmas gift you believe you've ever received? The floor is yours. Dazzle us with previous gifts that you've given and received.
Okay, I'm going to go back to my very youth for the best one I ever got. When I was like maybe like 5 or 6, I got like a flying police helicopter, and it was, you know, this huge thing. It was like 5 feet long, and it actually flew and stuff. It was unbelievable. Like, it was broken after like 2 days, and that was the best. And here's the best one. You really
enjoyed that one if it was broken in 2 days.
Yeah, well, it was huge, and when it flew and it hit the ground, it was gone. You know, that was it. But when I was young, I used to give my brother a bottle of Tipex. Do you know what Tipex is?
No.
Is it called Tipex in Australia?
No.
It's like,
explain it to us.
when you write, it's probably called something else. When you're writing a letter or something, and you get this white liquid stuff and brush it over it, and then write over it again. You know that stuff.
Oh yeah, we call it liquid paper. Yeah. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, I used to give my brother that every Christmas for like 5 years when I was like, 5 or 6 or 7 and stuff. I used to give it to him every Christmas. So that was it. Here's actually another good Christmas story.
Sorry, so what was that? That was like a gag gift. That was like, here's a really shit present. Here's some Tipex.
Exactly. Yeah, that was exactly it. I'll tell you why he deserved it, right? One Christmas, it was like maybe the 15th or around now in December, and myself and my parents went out shopping, and all the Christmas presents had been bought. They were under the tree and everything, and we were out shopping, and my brother was at home. My brother's like 7 years older than me, so he was probably like 15, 16 maybe at that time, and we went out shopping. And when we came home, we walked in, and there he was with my present open, and it was a PlayStation 1, I think, at the time. And he had the PlayStation 1 in the television, and he was playing my present.
Wow.
After we went out. Yeah. God, so I've never forgiven him for that. I don't think I ever will, to be honest. It was terrible.
I don't think you should.
You should never speak. That's ridiculous.
That's some serious stuff. That is some serious stuff. And the PlayStation 1, that would have been perfect. Those early gifts, I always think back to those. That's what always makes it special. So hopefully, Sean, you receive some decent gifts this year, and you avoid giving anything dodgy this year as well. We'll have to find out next year exactly how it went. But guys, there he is, Sean Sheehan. Make sure to follow him on Twitter at Sean Sheehan BA. He obviously does an amazing job on Severe MMA. Sean, quickly before the end of the year, what can fans expect from you guys? What's something big that's coming up that fans need to look out for?
I do this thing every year where I have 20 bold predictions for the year. So I wrote them maybe a couple of days ago, so they'll be coming out maybe around Christmas time, maybe before the end of the year. And we also have the Severe MMA Awards. So we there's
best Australian podcast award.
What a category! There's so many contestants
one
there.
Or two podcasts, but
I've been going through them the last couple of days, and it's, oh my god, it's the most brain killing activity ever. It's taken me like 3 days, and I only have, I still have a few categories to go through, but there are just so many fights and stuff that you're bound to miss something. But we 5 or 6 people voting on them anyway, so I can't take all the blame.
All right, well, there we go. That's a lot of good stuff to look forward to. Sean, as always, we really, really appreciate you coming on the show. It's always a pleasure. Happy 2016. We know it's not over yet, but if we don't speak to you before then, happy 2016. A lot of fun things to look forward to in 2017. Maybe even your first warm beer or warm Guinness.
Thanks for having me, lads. Happy Christmas.
Hey, this is Ariel Helwani, and you're listening to Submission Radio with my 2 favorite mates, Dennis and Casper.
What's up, fight fans? I'm the Sony Marvel Movies and Mixed Martial Arts Tommy Toehold, and it's that time of year again where we gather with family we only see during the holidays and tolerate awkward conversations with them while we regret eating that 4th piece of pie after dinner. But as annoying as that one uncle is, and while your overstuffed meal inches you closer to adult onset diabetes, it's not all bad, especially if you're an MMA fan. Here are the top 5 things MMA fans can be thankful for this holiday season. Number 5, everybody in the UFC plans on being a 2-weight world champion. Earlier this year, it was every single fighter's ambition to fight on the New York card. Once that event passed, now we get to hear after every fight, from the Fight Pass prelims to the main event of a Fox Sports 2 card, that every fighter is coming for a title in 2 weight classes. Thank you, Conor, for setting the bar a little bit higher. And you know what? Those dreams can come true, because our number 4 thing to be thankful for, there are more titles than ever. The UFC just added a women's 145 division, there is rumors of a 125, and I'm sure before the year is out there will be 6 or 7 more. But the best part of this is that most divisions now have an interim champion and a regular champion, so there are plenty of belts to go around. The number 3 reason to be thankful this holiday season, Ian McCall might actually get to fight in the next year. He is scheduled for a bout at UFC 208, which is only the 93rd time in the last 2 years he's been scheduled before a plague hit, or a flood wiped away the arena, or someone was locked in their hotel room and had to be freed by firefighters. Here's to hoping whatever horrible curse Ian McCall has brought on himself is finally lifted in the next year. Number 2, in just a few weeks we get to see the rematch between Fabricio Verdum and Cain Velasquez at sea level. Well, actually not quite sea level. Las Vegas is roughly 2,000 feet above sea level, but it's closer to the ground than Mexico City. So all you Caniacs out there, get ready for a 3,000-foot increase in Cain's performance. And finally at number 1, there is not a single 6-fight main card tough finale from now to the new year. And if that doesn't warm your little MMA heart, then I don't know what will. For everybody at Triple THS, I'm Tommy Toehold. Happy holidays, motherfuckers.
Yeah, I think he summed it up pretty well. Happy holidays, motherfuckers. There you go, you guys. Tommy Toehold, an absolute legend, one of the nicest guys ever, especially to be coming on our program all the time, doing these fun little segments. Tommy, we really can't tell you enough how much we appreciate it. And you guys can go check him out, of course, on YouTube, Tommy Toehold, on Facebook, at Tommy Toehold, and on Twitter, at Tommy Toehold. He is probably one of the best follows around when watching fights and any kind of live events, whether it's UFC, Bellator, or otherwise, because he is always putting up a ton of hilarious stuff. Without further ado, we're going to be moving on to our next guest, and Dennis, I believe he's a man who's making his first debut on the show.
Well, guys, it's a real pleasure to have our next guest with us. You know him from his amazing work covering the sport of MMA. This is his first time properly on the program. We've done some breakdowns in person with him before. John Morgan from MMA Junkie, welcome. I guess this is a bit of a debut on the actual Submission Radio program. It feels like it. So that's what I'm going to say. Welcome to your first appearance on Submission Radio.
I like it. Yeah, man. I'm feeling the love. You know, I thought you guys only used me when I was the only guy around, but knowing that you have options and you still reached out, it makes me feel pretty special.
We use you in many ways, John. Let's be honest.
let's not get into that, gentlemen. That'll be another show.
Now, look, after the fantastic Nando's smorgasbord we had, we figured, you know what, we have to get you back on the show. And of course, you do amazing work. Now, for fans who don't know, you're pretty much at every single UFC event all year with Ken Hathaway and the MMA Junkie team in one way or another. Now, as we have our final episode of the year, we like to look back on, you know, some of those events that stand out from the rest. Apart from the spectacle that was UFC 205 and maybe even UFC 200, what are some events that stand out, you know, in your mind from 2016, John?
Oh man, that's a tough question because you're right. The UFC 200 spectacle, I think, stood above everything else. I mean, it really did. So that one's definitely going to stick with me. I guess, you know, for me, sometimes it's the destinations that we get to go to and you know, spending time in new areas, you know, a crazy place like Sioux Falls, South Dakota, you know, a couple days after UFC 200 where, you know, nobody's expecting anything to happen and you know, kind of getting to spend time, you know, Tony Ferguson at an open workout where there's literally nobody there. There's no crowd. There's no media. There's no nothing because it's just kind of this little tiny show. And then he goes in there and puts on this, you know, amazing performance against Lando Venata, who we also got to speak with like one-on-one. I mean, it's moments like that, honestly, that really kind of stick out with me sometimes when we get to do that. Going to Croatia was fantastic. The Zagreb event and the amazing performance that Junior Dos Santos put on in the main event of that was a fantastic one. And you know, I'd probably say UFC 198, man, the Curitiba show, the Brazilian stadium show, the long-awaited Brazilian stadium show. And I got to be honest with you, man, that was, I think, the best. I've been fortunate enough to be at all of the UFC stadium shows, and that was the best one yet, just for the atmosphere, the actual arena setup, the size of it, the acoustics of it. It was the best one yet. So I guess off the top of my head, those are probably some of the ones that stick out.
Well, we'll take those answers and ask you another tough question. And the fact that UFC 206 had a classic fight between Choi and Swanson, but if you had to narrow down your top fights of the year, I mean, you are on the spot here. We didn't let you know about this ahead of time because we wanted to hear your honest thoughts. What comes to mind as your sort of top fights of the year that you've seen?
Ooh, man, another tough question. Yeah, that one's definitely up there. That was a lot of fun. You got to go back all the way to the beginning of the year and talk about Lawler versus Condit, right? I mean, that's right there on the list, even though that happened on January 2nd. So that was certainly one. Man, the McGregor Diaz rematch. How do you not include that on there? That was a hell of a fight there. Those are probably the ones that stick up the top of my head that just really were fantastic. I think those are in my top three. Now, it's funny, we haven't started putting our awards yet. We do it at MMA Junkie as well. We kind of put together a list and we vote as a staff and we have our fans vote as well and see what they think. And we haven't really started to put those together yet, but I think those will be the three on top of my list.
Wow. You've done this for, quite some time, to say the least, John. Would you say this has been one of the more exciting years for MMA fans? And if you could pick one year that stands out for you in your time covering the sport, which would it be? I know that's sort of another tough question and hard to narrow it down. I mean, who knows? It could be a year that's quite a while away that stands out for other reasons.
That's interesting too to think about. Yeah, it does feel like a crazy year. It's, I think, as the sport continues to develop and grow, it gets more exciting. You've got more media outlets, such as yourself. I mean, I get to travel around the world and meet you guys that are covering it from different nations, and that certainly wasn't the case not that long ago. The UFC wasn't as global of a product. Most of its events were being held in the United States, not too long ago, and now it's a real international brand, and along with that becomes international media outlets and people, different personalities and people covering different aspects and people finding their niche. So I do feel like it's been one of the most exciting just because, I feel like there's so much going on. I feel like people are really starting to cover the business side of it, just different aspects of things. I mean, obviously the UFC being sold was crazy. I mean, it's not that we've noticed a heck of a lot of difference behind the scenes so far, but, a lot of layoffs, obviously, but as far as operations go, it's happening. But, there's definitely things in wheels in motion right now. So, yeah, I'd have to say this is probably the craziest year. Years that stand out. It's funny because it's so different. It wasn't that long ago that every UFC event was like the Super Bowl, to put it in American sports parlance, where like, there was one show every 2 or 3 months and you knew top to bottom what every fight on the card was, and you spent days, debating the potential results of every single fight. And now you've got, 2 fights in one day, or 2 fight cards on back-to-back nights, and you sometimes forget what fight is happening where. And so now it's kind of more like a regular season type sporting event, where you can miss a few here and miss a few there, and it's still okay. You still get hyped for the big pay-per-views, but it's not like every single one. So yeah, it's definitely a crazy time in the UFC, that's for sure.
Well, the tough questions are going to continue, John, because this one's a real doozy. I mean, there's been some massive events this year with 205 and 200, but if you had to talk about your favorite event of all time that you've covered in your long, illustrious career, is there one that just stands out from your mind, and which one would it be?
That's crazy, man. 205 was up there. It was really something special. I think a couple that stand out to me. UFC 134, which was Silva versus Okami in Rio de Janeiro. And it wasn't so much the Silva-Okami fight, but it was the return of the UFC to Brazil after a long time away. And, getting to see that sold-out Brazilian crowd at HSBC Arena. Shogun was on the card. Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira was on the card. I mean, this was legends of the sport fighting in their native Brazil, man. I mean, that was one that definitely stood out for me. UFC 129, St. Pierre versus Shields at the Rogers Center. That was cool. The first stadium show. Again, I really think the one in Curitiba was the better in terms of fan quality and experience, because the building at Rogers Center was just so big. But it was pretty damn special. And, one that's kind of my favorite, UFC 116, Lesnar versus Carwin. There was something about that night. It was just exciting, the way things built up. It was a pretty cool night, and the way it kind of finished off. You had 4 finishes to finish it up. And I just remember it building. The co-main event was this crazy Chris Lieben Yoshihiro Akiyama fight, if you'll remember that one. Everything that was going on with Chris Lieben at the time, and then of course it finished up with Brock Lesnar and Shane Carwin, which was a wild fight in itself. So yeah, I guess those are off the top of my head.
I think you did well for what was essentially a really tough question, tough to narrow down. I'm curious, though, because you obviously travel the world year long and have been doing it for many years. Is there a particular place that stands out to you as one of your favorites that you go to? You talk about going to Brazil and Australia and all over the States and places in Europe. You've had some interesting stories from places in Asia where, you were some of the only English-speaking media outlets. Is there, and obviously, like, when you go to these places, you spend a few days there and you get to sort of absorb the culture and sort of see the different people and things like that. Is there any place that stands out to you as one of your favorites? And is there maybe any funny stories that you can share from your time on the road? Obviously, you've got the MMA Roadshow, which is a great podcast, and if people want to catch them on a weekly basis, they can go to there. But any fun ones that you can sort of rattle off here? And it's
Was that your polite way?
Unrated program, so feel free to dish whatever.
I was going to say, was that your polite way of saying that I travel the world, partake of my share of frosty beverages, and see the bars of the world?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, we know that whatever story you're going to tell us is probably going to be something to do with a bar.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I tell you what, it's not my finest one, but I tell you what, there's a lot of great places. First of all, I do actually love coming to events in Australia. They're some of my favorite because I love the morning start time. It's fantastic. And I love the fact that the Aussies show up at like 9:30 in the morning, like hammered already for the first fight of the night. You know what I mean? Like, I love that. So I love the morning start times. Rio is amazing, man. If you can get a big event, if anybody ever gets a chance to travel to Rio de Janeiro, the crowd is awesome, and it's just a beautiful city as far as the beach, and it's great. But I'll tell you what, Dublin, as it's been said, lives up pound for pound. The volume there, the craziness there is nuts. And I guess the first time I went to Dublin was when Conor was headlining. What was that, Diego Brandao, right? In the headlining fight. And I actually paid my own way to get over there because Matt Erickson, his mom, was living in Europe at the time, and so couldn't tell him not to go and not get a free trip to go see his mom. But I'm like, the hell with it. I'm paying my own way. I want to go over there. I want to see what this Dublin crowd's all about. So since I paid my own way, I wasn't exactly on the MMA Junkie dime, and I wasn't exactly working full time. So we went out and had our fair share of pints of Guinness. And I just remember actually waking up on the floor and realizing it and realizing, first of all, like, what the hell am I doing on the floor, and then realizing, what the hell am I doing on the bathroom floor, and then realizing, what the hell am I doing on a bathroom floor that's not even my own bathroom in my hotel room. So Dublin can do it to you, man. The fans, they were awesome, and the Guinness and the Irish whiskey was flowing freely, and I definitely got caught up in the entertainment of that moment.
Beautiful. Can you disclose whose floor it was, or do we want to keep that a secret?
No, luckily enough, it was cold coffee. It was Ken Hathaway. I guess at some point we were staying in different hotels, and at some point it was just like, dude, I am far too gone to try to make it back to my hotel. So that's the best we could put together.
It'd be funny if it was some random Irish families, and you just woke up in their bathroom and then walked out while they're having breakfast and excused yourself.
I tell you what, man. But you know what's so cool is, like, this community. It's really funny. I remember going to Milwaukee one time, and there was a fan that was just like, "Hey, bro, what time do you get in the airport, man? I'll pick you up from the airport." And I'm like, "Dude, I'm taking a red eye. You don't have to do that, man. I get in at like 6 in the morning." And he's like, "No problem, bro. I got you." He's like, "I love what you do. I'd love to meet you." He's like, "I'll come pick you up at the airport at 6 a.m. and drive you to your hotel." And I was like, "What?" I'm like, "That's so cool." So it's kind of funny, talk about like a random family. I mean, I think that's what's been awesome, man. As much as I get to travel, I think that's the greatest part about it, is meeting people that are like, "Hey, man, I love what you do. I appreciate your work. I see that." It's like really cool to be like, wow, man, somebody actually pays attention to what the hell I'm doing, and enough so that they would come get up at 6 in the morning and pick me up at the airport. I mean, stuff like that's amazing. When we were just in Melbourne not that long ago, hooking up with some of the fans out there that took us out for a couple of cocktails and dinner and stuff like that, and just talking fights all night long. It's that stuff's fun, man. You can't replace that. It's kind of a great thing, I guess, about MMA, is like we all kind of share this similar passion and kind of makes us a little community,
Definite family vibes. Now, let's look forward. I know we've been asking you crazy questions about looking back, but let's look forward to 2017, because there are some people who are skeptical about a lack of big names around to fill out major cards. We've got the possibility of Ronda Rousey retiring after UFC 207. McGregor, who knows when he's going to be back. Jones is out till July. What do you think about this sentiment from fans that the UFC will be struggling to find those marquee matchups for the first half of 2017?
I think it's a very fair sentiment, to be honest with you. I mean, it's a very real issue. I mean, heck, there's already been one pay-per-view that was announced for Anaheim that's been moved back to later in the year, right? And, you don't want to call that canceling. If you're the UFC, you say we rescheduled it. But bottom line is you pushed everything back by one pay-per-view. So, I think there's a legitimate concern there. And I think, if you go back to those investor documents that came out this year, thanks to Steve Morocco and Ben Folks of MMA Junkie that did a really good job, a series of reports on that. But if you go in there, you'll see that the UFC has identified that, pay-per-view is tough, and it fluctuates because it's so star-driven. It's based around one name. I mean, you look at sometimes fight cards. I mean, UFC 206, for instance, how great was that card, man? It was one of the most entertaining fight cards of the year, right up there with UFC 199. but the buy rates were crap because there wasn't the names on there that casual fans want. So I do think there's a real issue with that, and I do think the UFC is going to struggle. But I think the other thing, too, to point out is that the UFC realizes that, and they've identified that. And I think as you move forward, you're not going to see them go away from pay-per-view. There's just too much money on the table. They're the king of it. I mean, they make a lot of money. But I think they also realize, if they can get their income to be better, stood up by the rights fees that they're distributing around the world, whether it be, Fox in the United States, Global in Brazil, emerging markets everywhere else, if they can get more of their income coming in, via those rights fees, then they don't have to do as many pay-per-views. Instead of doing 12 or 13 pay-per-views a year, maybe you do 8. And you make sure that you got 2 title fights on every single one of them, and you're able to stack up a little bit. So, kind of a long answer because I think that's a long-term look at where their business is going. But yeah, absolutely. There's no question about it. And while I'm sure they'd never admit it on record, I'm sure behind closed doors, they'd be willing to admit it too. I mean, if Ronda loses at UFC 207, if Conor decides to stay out for, the first 6 or 8 months of the year, you don't have John Jones until July. Yeah, man, there's trouble, having those big marketable names at the top of your pay-per-view.
There's an interesting landscape now in the women's division with Holly Holm taking on Jermaine Durandamini for the featherweight title. And sorry, there was absolutely zero segue there, John. I know you probably noticed that immediately. Dana White, he's said that in a recent interview, there's a chance where Holly Holm fights Ronda Rousey next if she becomes champion. If Ronda does win at UFC 207, who would you ever fight next, John? Have you had the chance to sort of think about this and mull it over?
I mean, to me, it's Cyborg. I mean, that's the fight I want to see. I haven't thought about it a whole lot, to be honest with you. But damn, I mean, what other fight do you want to see? That's the one fight that's out there, right? I mean, that's the Pacquiao Mayweather of the UFC women's divisions. I mean, that's the fight that everybody wants to see. So certainly an uphill battle for Ronda Rousey. But if she wins, I hope they find a way to make it happen. And I know there's people out there that say that Ronda's avoiding Cyborg and always has avoided Cyborg. I can tell you that everything I've ever heard from her people and the people around her is that she always wanted to fight Cyborg. She just always wanted it to be her last fight. She always knew that, kind of putting it off until the end, not only would make it, kind of build up a little bit, but if you beat Cyborg, where the hell do you go from there? I mean, there's what fight do you match up next after that? So I think that's one reason that she wanted to always put it off. Now, Holly Holm came in and threw a wrench in the plans, but I think that was always kind of her plan, was to face Cyborg last and then to ride off in the sunset. I think she's only got a handful of fights left, maybe even only 2. So if she can beat Amanda Nunes, I would really like to see her fight Cyborg.
Does this Rousey Holm fight make sense to you? I mean, a lot of people wondering if Dana White just sort of mentioned that out of spite because Cyborg knocked a few fights back. Because, I mean, you'd think if Holm won the title, Cyborg would get the next shot at fighting her. How do you read into Dana saying that there could be a possibility that Holm fights Ronda Rousey next?
It would make sense. I mean, that's just the way it would make sense, right, in the logical progression of the division, especially if Cyborg is still saying she can't fight or she can't make it by a certain time. I mean, who knows exactly how all those are going down. I mean, they obviously they've been working together for a long time. I mean, let's not forget, Zuffa's been footing the bill for Cyborg while she's been fighting in Invictus. So it's not like they just suddenly opened communications with Cyborg and it didn't go well over the course of a week, and so they decided to move on in another direction. I mean, they've got plans and they've been working together for a long time, and I think they feel like, progress probably isn't going to be made. But yeah, overall, no. I mean, Rousey Holm, will it sell? I'm sure it will. I mean, there's casual fans out there. I mean, look, there's casual fans that can't wait to see Chael and Tito fight, right? I mean, even though you can say, well, these guys aren't relevant in the division anymore. They don't care. They want names that they recognize. They want people that they know, and they're excited about it. And so I do think that if you put that fight together financially, hell yeah, it makes sense. I think people, it would do very good buys, and the UFC would be happy with it. But I just can't imagine folks like you, folks like me, really being pumped up and saying, well, I mean, we'd much rather see this rematch with Holm rather than a Cyborg fight. I just don't buy that, especially at 145.
All right, John. Well, you've been great thus far. We'll let you go in a moment because we know you're a busy man. Before we do let you go, this is the holiday edition of Submission Radio, so we've been asking everybody 2 massive questions. You thought the tough ones were over. They're coming back. What is the greatest gift you've ever received in the history of gifts, and what is the greatest Christmas gift that you've ever given?
Oh, damn, that is a tough one. The greatest gift I've ever received. Man, I'm horrible, dude. I just buy everything for myself when I want it. I'm bad like that, so I don't let anybody like kind of wait and hook me up, So I'm really bad about that. But you know what? I remember when I was a little kid. I'm so old that I had a Nintendo 8-bit system. I mean, not this throwback that they got now, right? That they're distributing now. No, I had the real damn thing when you had to like blow into the cartridge to clean it off and get the dust out of there. I had that. And I remember a football game called 10-Yard Fight. And that's all I wanted was 10-Yard Fight, man. I wanted the football game. I grew up in Dallas, Texas. We're football mad in Dallas. And I wanted 10-Yard Fight. But it was popular. It was sold out everywhere. This was back in the day. There weren't, you didn't have Amazon.com. You couldn't get your stuff shipped to you. You had to go to a brick and mortar store, and they were sold out everywhere. And my parents let me know that it was sold out, that they tried, but it was sold out. And I was super sad. And yet somehow on Christmas Day, miraculously, they showed up with it, with 10-Yard Fight. And I remember just going crazy, just leaping for it because I'm so excited. Damn, I hadn't thought about that in forever, man. I think I was like fucking 7 years old. What am I thinking? Yeah, so that was it. And the greatest gift I've ever given, dude, I'll tell you what, man, it's kind of cheesy, but the greatest gift I've ever given, I love giving vacations to my wife and son. We always, so I've given that a couple times because we'll do like a VIP trip to like Disneyland, and it's a present for all of us, man. I know that you guys don't have kids, but so the last couple of years, I've kind of put together a VIP package for my family and given it to them on Christmas, and then we end up going later in the year. But there's no better joy, dude, like seeing your kid's face light up because he's seeing Mickey Mouse for the first time. Like, holy shit, dude, it's still like it can bring a tear to my eye just thinking about it. Just seeing like the sheer joy of a little kid, man, when they're so innocent and happy and shit like that. It's pretty amazing. So I guess that's a gift for myself as well as my family. But I love that this sport has been able to provide me the opportunity to do that for my family.
That sounds very similar to what my girlfriend said about me when I went to Disneyland for the first time earlier this year around UFC 200. But back when I was young and innocent, before I had to watch UFC 205, and then I really learned what life was like. Now, John, thank you so much for coming onto the program. Guys, make sure to follow John on Twitter at MMA Junkie. John, MMA Junkie, obviously the place to go for all your MMA coverage, especially with UFC 207 coming up. Make sure to go check him out. Make sure to follow John. Make sure to follow the MMA Roadshow, which is a fantastic program him and Ken do. I mean, we made a little guest appearance when they were here in Melbourne, but so many funny stories. If you guys haven't subscribed to that, make sure you do because you're going to be missing out. A lot of great stuff there. Again, John, thank you so much and have a good New Year's Eve. We'll catch you in 2017.
Looking forward to it, guys.
Hey, guys, this is Brian Stan. You're listening to Submission Radio.
All right, guys. Now, coming onto the program is a guy that's a good friend of the show. You would have seen him from Buffet Adventures in 2016. Recognize him from many, many episodes. He graces us here for our final episode. It's been tough to get him on. We're very lucky. This is a very special episode for us, and we're able to have him on this landmark episode. Elias Cepeda, welcome back to Submission Radio. It's been a while, man.
Yeah, it's been way too long. I like how it sounds like I've been a prima donna and difficult. But
yeah, our people have had a difficult time talking to your people, et cetera, et cetera.
That's right. You finally got through from my secretaries. No, it's been too long, man. It's been too long since I've seen you guys to talk with you. Thanks so much for having me on.
Hey, man, it's worth the hamper in the green room, okay? Anytime you want to come on, we'll put that on for you. Now, before we jump on and break down the card from today, the wonderful Paige Van Zandt versus Michelle Waterson card, we're going to get into a little bit of the big topic this week, which is, of course, the addition of a female featherweight division to the UFC. A lot to talk about here, a lot of digest. I'm going to jump right into it because, let's jump right into the heart of the storm. Casper, a lot of people are saying Cyborg isn't going to be a part of this matchup as maybe a bit of a snub from the UFC for passing up a few matchups and not being ready to take them on. Where do you sit on all this? Do you think it's a snub? Do you think it's just a situation where she passed up too many fights back to back? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I definitely agree that that's basically the main story here. I don't think it's necessarily a snub against Cyborg, even if that's really what it looks like. I think the UFC just needed a title fight for that date to build a pay-per-view, much like with the interim belt for Holloway versus Pettis. It goes with what Dana White was saying about offering Cyborg 2 fights on 2 different dates. I think the first, I can only assume, would have been on January 21st in California at the original UFC 208. Then they moved it, and they said, well, I'm assuming they said, well, can you fight on this new date? One thing that I think was sort of poorly handled, though, is the fact that Dana White was very much on the offensive about how Cyborg just flat out turned down fights. He didn't give any reason or mention of, what the harsh weight cut did to her body, and he sort of threw in that barb about Joe Silva mentioning that 145 might not be the weight class for her. And that's essentially because the UFC try to distance themselves from any negative PR regarding fighters putting themselves, in danger through drastic weight cuts. You don't really see any footage or any mentions of weight cuts too often with the UFC. But the truth is, her body has been damaged from making the, ridiculous weight of 140 pounds, a weight that the UFC forced down upon her against a fighter who would have been happy to, compete at 145 pounds. So if Cyborg needs time to recover her body and can't fit into the UFC's time frame, the UFC can essentially thank themselves for that one. I'm not a fan of the UFC burying fighters like this. I think from a PR standpoint, Dana White easily, could have said something along the lines of, hey, I really wanted to make this fight happen. I think Cyborg deserves to fight for this belt, but she's got a few injuries that she needs to heal up, or her body's not ready, or something like that. This title fight will go ahead, and then she'll fight the winner, or she'll come in when she's ready. Something like that, rather than burying her. That's my whole thoughts on it.
Yeah, Elias, it's an interesting situation that a casual fan doesn't really understand. You deplete your body. It needs time to heal. But where do you stand in all this? Because there are those people, those pundits out there who are saying that the fact that she's turned down a few fights in a row means that, what kind of person would do that? What kind of person would knock it back? And especially with the fact that she was talking in a lot of interviews about wanting there to be a featherweight division in the UFC. You have a pretty good relationship with Cris. She's been on our show a few times, but you've known her for quite some time. You speak to her quite regularly. Can you sort of explain the situation to that casual fan who doesn't really understand what happened here? And also tell us if you think she got snubbed by the UFC.
Well, I think Casper broke down a lot of that much in the same way that I've been thinking of it. But yeah, briefly, for folks that are just mystified how, quote unquote, how many fights she's turned down. Listen, she fought 2 months ago. How many fights could she be expected to accept 2 months after her last fight, which itself was, not too long after her previous one, especially if it was done in an arbitrary weight cut, which was particularly brutal, arbitrary on behalf of the UFC, like Casper was saying, which they have themselves to thank for her needing extra recovery time. And so people that are saying that they're just ignorant of, and they don't know much about the sport, they don't know much about the process of the fighters, and they're easily, they buy in easily to whatever the dominant narrative is. In this case, Dana White coming out and doing what he does so often and has for so long, which is burying fighters, like Casper said. He does this often, and it's not an accident, and that's why there's good evidence to believe that it was personal. They don't like that Cyborg, just, in my opinion, drew so much attention to the life-risking process that all major weight cuts are, and hers especially, really, really tough. And they don't like the fact that she highlighted that they made her do it for no good reason. To fight at 140 twice in 2016, which is not even a weight class that anyone has a world champion in. When she's a long time, probably the longest current reigning world champion in MMA, and they just trying to whitewash that. They didn't like that she criticized their pay and their contract. They didn't like that she pointed out the fact that Dana White has said really ugly misogynistic things and slurs about her. And this is the way they express that dissatisfaction in a very passive aggressive way. So him burying her and bringing Joe Silva in, that somehow the long-time featherweight world champion doesn't belong at featherweight is absurd, and it's not an accident. And it absolutely points to, in my opinion, them doing this as a slight. Those slights, those insults are part of the larger slight, which is having a featherweight division, having a featherweight title fight without the featherweight world champion. So I think it is intentional, and I think it's it's a part of it's more than anything, it's a part of a callousness on behalf of the UFC. They expect, and they're used to fighters doing whatever it is they tell them to and whatever time frame they need to. Whether it's Conor McGregor flying from Las Vegas to Connecticut to do interviews on Fight Week while cutting weight for a featherweight championship fight, to interview with ESPN, or them dropping Conor McGregor effectively off of UFC 200 because he had the audacity to ask them to change the media tour dates that he was going to do, which he's not compensated for directly, by a couple of weeks. They're just used to that. They used to fight. They're used to making fights in the back afterwards with sometimes still injured fighters for their next fight, like they did with Shogun Rua when they made the fight between Shogun and Liddell. It was moments after Shogun was back in the locker room. They're used to doing things like this, and they just don't really give a damn operationally about what's good for fighters. And Casper's right that they've shied away from negative PR about weight cutting, but the reality is they've done nothing to really discourage the dangerous weight cutting that goes on, because they still expect fighters to drop weight and really too short notice. Listen, for a world champion, to say nothing of the longest reigning current world champion, which is Cris Cyborg, for her to do any fight at any weight on like a 7 or 8 week camp is a bit insulting. By the end of his career, George St. Pierre was taking 3 months. He would schedule stuff out, so he had a 3-month camp almost. That's the type of respect that longtime legendary champions deserve. And they're not extending that to Cris Cyborg, and they're extending that disrespect to the point of having a world title fight between two really wonderful fighters, one of whom was on a 2-fight winning streak and has never fought, I don't believe, in MMA at that weight class, and the other one hasn't fought at that weight class in years and years. So I think it's a phenomenal disrespect. I think, yes, they did do it because they wanted a title fight to promote on that card, but the fact that that's more important to them than doing right by fighters, and that they would easily start trashing a fighter's entire legacy or ignoring it, kind of casting aspersion on it just by offhanded flit remarks, in order to put together a meaningless piece of gold on someone's waist because it might sell, 200 more pay-per-views or whatever. That's a part of the problem. So yeah, I think it's a huge insult, and I think at the end of the day, it's unfortunate for the UFC because they've never had this situation to this point before, but now we're running into a situation where they might even call into question the legitimacy of their titles being considered world titles. We've got 3 men now that are featherweight world champions. We've got they're about to crown a new women's featherweight champion, and the world champion is not even going to be involved in that matchup. So it's actually just hurting their legitimacy and their brand, in my view, at the end of the day.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that point. I mean, UFC 206 or so, another interim champion sort of crowned. I feel like a lot of fans as well, it's losing that kind of marketing buzz, that pool that they get for those pay-per-view buys. I feel like eventually fans will stop caring about the belts because so much is going on and so much has been taken away from the mystique of the belts. And also I found it funny how Dana White said if Holly Holm wins, she may fight Ronda Rousey again. So putting that out there as well. It's like, well, if Ronda Rousey's bantamweight champion, why is she fighting the featherweight champion? Like, the whole thing is just a bit ridiculous. But, Casper, let's talk about that event. I mean, it's going to be UFC 208. It's going to be February 11th there in America. And, I mean, it's not a big secret, the fact the UFC is sort of struggling to fill these cards at the start of the year with not much pulling power. But what do you think about Holly Holm versus Randami being for this title? What do you think? Do you think it actually will get the job done? And what do you think about the title actually being on the line? As you said, Elias brings up a good point. These two women, not exactly what comes to mind as number one featherweight contenders right now.
Yeah, well, that's the funny thing. You mentioned UFC 206, where they threw that interim title belt out there to either Max Holloway or Anthony Pettis, and it was widely covered that it's not like it's really going to put asses in seats. It's not like it's really going to make people jump out of their chairs and go, wow, I got to buy this pay-per-view because there's a belt on the line. I think Elias covered it pretty well, as did you, where the belts are kind of, they don't really mean as much as they used to. As far as Holly Holm and Jermaine de Randami being the ones to fight for it, I think it certainly looks funny on paper, with Cyborg looming heavily over this card as the actual featherweight champion, and then you have two women who don't really have much history at featherweight fighting for the inaugural UFC featherweight belt. One's ranked 11 at the weight class below, and the other, though a former champion, Holly Holm, is coming off 2 losses in a row. If I had to guess, I'd say these were the 2 women that Cyborg was offered, and then when that didn't work out, the UFC just said, well, I guess we'll just put them against each other. This matchup, much like even the Cyborg fight would have been, in my opinion, it's really just a stepping stone for things to come and a bridge towards other future fights. I think the plan was for Cyborg to hopefully win the featherweight belt, Ronda to win the bantamweight belt, and then have them both meet in the middle, have Ronda fight for the chance to become a dual champion in a fight that would hopefully sell, 6 gazillion pay-per-views. Now the UFC has other options, and it's kind of indicative of what they've done in the past, where they like to potentially negotiate or phase other fighters out when they don't really play along and play ball. In this case, now, if Ronda wins the 135 belt and Holly wins the featherweight belt, they can do the Holly Holm rematch. This time for the featherweight belt, again, Ronda has the chance to hold 2 belts, and it makes an already, highly anticipated rematch even more high stakes here. I don't know if that's a word. It's got more high stakes. So they kind of look at it as like, all right, well, if we're not getting this Cyborg fight immediately, we'll do the Holm rematch, and now there's 2 belts involved. It just makes it that much more bigger. It's a risky move, though. What if Ronda loses on her way to Cyborg? What if, Jermaine Durandamy wins? All of this could sort of go out the window, but I think that's basically where the UFC are going with this.
Yeah, it's a bit silly, especially if she does fight home for the featherweight title, but then still somehow figures out a way or decides not to fight Cyborg. That would be ridiculous. But at least I'm wondering, I mean, you have a good relationship with Cris. When she was on our program, she mentioned some stuff about possibly going to other promotions, wanting to fight for other companies. And I saw in a bunch of interviews as well, she's legitimately hurt here and legitimately looks like she may not want to stay in the UFC for the long term. It doesn't seem like it's really about the money or the fame for her. I think this respect thing and the stuff that's been happening is really legitimately being hurting her. Do you think she'll stick around with the company for the foreseeable future, or do you think she'll leave at the first opportunity she can?
I haven't. Her team released a statement to me. I haven't spoken with her, but yeah, a good professional relationship. She's been kind enough to let me into her camp several times and had some conversations. I mean, I would agree with you that it seems that she's hurt. I would agree that we have no real indication that she is wowed or impressed or feels obligated to stay with the UFC. How difficult or easy that it would be for her to get out of her contract and go somewhere else without them releasing her, I don't know. It's a very convoluted situation as far as I can tell with the UFC and Invicta, both involved, to say nothing of possible, the possibilities which will happen one day of UFC athletes just saying, yeah, I have this contract, but I think this contract is illegal. So I don't know what possibilities will be there for her. I would imagine, if I were her, I would imagine that's where my head would be at. It's like, listen, I'm going to go somewhere else. I don't. What's the point of fighting here? She, years before Ronda Rousey, who is a phenomenal living legend in and of herself, even went pro in MMA. Cyborg was fighting on premium cable and network television, setting records. She's learned to make a living long before the UFC was smart enough to put her on their in their octagon. So she certainly doesn't feel like she's gotten anything that she's gotten from the UFC. In fact, she brought a lot of buzz and attention to the UFC by her fighting there. So I don't think she's unlike most fighters where she doesn't feel like she needs the UFC to make a living, because unfortunately she's had to do without them for most of her career because they weren't smart enough to have women early enough and not women her size. So I don't know what her options are going to be legally. I would imagine she was pretty distraught. And I know from talking to some folks in her camp that they absolutely feel like this is just the latest way for Dana White to stick it to her. They feel with the utmost sincerity, it seems to me, that this is a very personal thing. I don't know where the hell that puts you, where the person that you're working for, and she said this in interviews with myself and with others, I'm sure she said similar things with you guys, where, she doesn't quite know what to make of a situation where her promoter, who is ostensibly there to promote her, to help make her and them money, is the one bashing her and throwing explicit and non-explicit shade on her. Like, that's a really bizarre situation. And Dana White operates with extreme petulance and childishness and lets personal stuff gets in the way more than we think business people do a lot of times. So it's certainly not outside of his modus operandi to put personal feelings consciously or subconsciously ahead of smart decision making.
Yeah, wow. I mean, it's one of those situations that sometimes when I think about what Dana White says, I think to him, he thinks, look, why would they take it so personally? But you have fighters from all different cultures, different backgrounds, and some people, this legitimately hurts their feelings. And even though Dana White, and I know a lot of other fighters, maybe they hear something, they'll be like, it's just Dana White doing his thing. Some fighters get legitimately hurt by that. And I mean, it's kind of that high school mentality where maybe back in our days, we made fun of a couple of the kids in class thinking, they just know we're teasing him. And those kids sort of went home and they were pretty upset about it. I mean, different people take things differently. So it's not really an approach that always works for everybody. But let's jump to the card from earlier on today, UFC on Fox 22 from the beautiful new arena in Sacramento. That thing looked pretty cool, guys. I'm not going to lie. I kind of wish I was there just to enjoy it. And maybe I got a feeling, I'm not sure if it's true, but I got a feeling there might have been good Wi-Fi there, which for media people, that's like the number one thing. We forget everything else. Could be the worst fights in the world. Got good Wi-Fi, got a good life. But Casper, I'm going to jump to the opening fight of the main card to you first. Alan Jouban versus Platinum Mike Perry. I mean, this was a fight where Mike looked good initially, but Alan was really, really smart, was able to use his footwork, able to use his experience and really outwork Mike and show him a sort of a different opponent that he hasn't really seen before. His strategy, and Mike didn't really have much to answer in the fight. And sort of ended up losing. What did you make of the fight and performances from both men?
Look, I think this is a really good fight, a really good performance by Alan Jouban. It was a little bit different than what I expected, not in a bad way. I kind of sort of leading into it had it going one of either two ways. I could see Mike Perry going in there and really, testing Alan Jouban's chin. He has been knocked out before. I kind of thought that with Mike Perry's pressure and the way that Alan Jouban sometimes folds under pressure, it could go pear-shaped, but then I thought, well, look, Alan Jouban, he is the better technical striker, and if he can use his clinch when Mike Perry comes in, he could definitely, have his own keys to victory. But really, Alan Jouban fought very, very smart. He wasn't the brawler that we've seen in the past. He sort of stayed on the outside, was very, very disciplined, implemented a game plan. And from the early onset, he had a lot of shots that he threw to Mike Perry's body and a lot of leg kicks, and that really paid dividends by the time the fight really hit the, the second round and the third round. And Mike Perry really didn't have an answer for it. He was just basically going in there, power punching, and against a skilled guy like Alan Jouban, who, this is like Alan Jouban version 2.0, the much more finessed Alan Jouban. It really didn't work. It was a great fight, really, really awesome one. I don't think you really take anything away from Mike Perry, though. He's going to have to go back to the drawing board, learn a few new things, diversify the arsenal, and look, this is his 9th pro fight. I don't think he really loses a lot of steam, especially considering it was a fun fight. I think you got to feed him some lower-ranked fighters and essentially build him up again.
Yeah, and it's crazy how you mentioned it's his 9th pro fight, because in 2016 he had 5 fights and 3 fights in the UFC in a very short span of time. So if you take that into consideration, the guy is super sort of new in a lot of ways and still figuring stuff out. Elias, to me, it looked like a couple of key things that he needs to work on: his head movement, dealing with kicks, and he's got the toughness, but sort of understand it takes a lot more than toughness to win matches against the top guys in the division. What do you think the future holds for Mike Perry? A lot of people thinking this will be the big learning experience that he needs to sort of take his skills to the next level.
Yeah, I mean, I hope he takes some time off, because the kid is taking a lot of damage in a short period of time for fighting so much. All those camps, he was successful before this fight, but those camps are going to take their toll. And man, he took some really, really hard shots. He stalked Allen in this fight. But Allen threw and landed about twice as many shots. He wobbled him. He dropped him. I mean, the kid wouldn't go away. In addition to that, like you guys mentioned, his liver was beat up as well as his lead leg. So the kid's a hoss, and he takes a lot of damage. So he needs to rest. He's fighting a bit too much, and he's absolutely needs to fight people a bit below Alan Jouban's level, because the difficulty with such a big power puncher is that because he's capable of knocking anyone out at any given night, you can push him through the ranks a little bit too fast, and he wears himself out, doesn't really have much time to improve between fights, and take some damage along the way. So he's a UFC fighter, but he needs to he definitely needs to be fighting a little bit less of a caliber. Alan Jouban really impressed me. He took some big shots, and he just fought smart. He never got backed completely up to the cage. He was always striking and going high, low, mid-range with punches, knees, and kicks. He just really kept Mike off balance and really landed some really awesome power shots of his own, like a good check hook over and over. He showed some really good takedowns as well. Really impressive performance from Joban. It didn't have a mark on him on his face afterwards. I know his head was ringing a little bit, but he really fought masterfully.
Yeah, it was a great performance from Allen. I'll be interested to see what happens next. And he took this fight because he wanted to get a fight in 2016 and didn't want to wait any longer to have another fight. So great to see he got that victory. Now, Elias, I'm wondering, the next fight is Uriah Faber versus Brad Pickett, the big fight of the night, really. Uriah Faber's last fight. A lot of people sort of curious as to why it was positioned like this on the card. People understand why it wasn't the main event. You want to sort of showcase the younger talent, but why not put it as the co-main? A lot of people felt like some people might have turned off the TVs after this fight and might maybe gone on to do other things. What did you think about the positioning of this fight on the card?
Yeah, it doesn't offend me, but I don't know that it was going to be a successful strategy. I guess the TV ratings will tell, right? So we'll see. But it didn't offend me. There's an argument for it offending. I read and talked to people who were offended by it. I could hear that. But on the other hand, the only reason it doesn't offend me is because, listen, we've got a situation where at least one person in that matchup, Uriah Faber versus Brad Pickett, is saying he's not going to go on any further. So why don't we just let someone else, have a shot at getting some more attention? Faber didn't seem to care much about it, but certainly it seemed like, I wasn't in the arena, but it seemed like within the arena that was pretty much the crescendo, the apex of that night. So yeah, I wonder how the energy played out in terms of television viewing. There were really good submission wins that followed it, but I don't know. A former world champion in Michelle Waterson headlining a card doesn't offend me. A good top 10 contender like Paige Van Zandt headlining against her doesn't offend me. I think Sage Northcutt and Mickey Gall ahead of Uriah Faber is insulting. But and I'm curious about that matchup too. I'm curious what you guys think about that. I guess the UFC is just as excited about Mickey Gall as they were about Sage Northcutt, because this was a really stupid fight for Sage Northcutt to accept. That was a dumb fight to go up 15 pounds because someone called you out in a bad stylistic matchup, and it played out pretty much like I would imagine everyone assumed it was going to. So that kind of confused me.
We'll get to that fight in just a moment, but I will say, as far as Paige Van Zandt, Michelle Waterson headlining over Uriah Faber, you're right. Uriah Faber sort of seemed like he didn't really care. And I think in a way it would be for his best interest, not just the UFC's. Obviously the UFC, they want to promote someone who's going to stick around as opposed to go. And Uriah Faber, because he owns MMA Inc., the management company, and has guys like Cody Garbrandt and Paige Van Zandt underneath it. If you want to in some ways nurture your investment, someone that you eventually will, sort of pay dividends to you, you want them to be highlighted as much as possible. And then you got the fact that Paige Van Zandt's coming off, that run of Dancing with the Stars. She's got some fans. The UFC have been heavily promoting her. Dave Meltzer actually wrote a really good article about UFC on Fox 22, and I hope I don't butcher it. If you should probably just go out and read it for yourselves. But he essentially talked about how this kind of highlights the WME IMG era, where they're sort of going for people who are good looking and sort of names and marketable, as opposed to quality of fights, which is very different and contrasting to what they normally do with these UFC on Fox cards. Not only in general, because normally you have either like a title fight or a title contender or an elimination, a title eliminator or something along those lines, or just a really big fight in the main event. Especially around this time when, as he mentioned, the UFC has been promoted with the NFL. But in this case, you've gone, like you mentioned, the Mickey Galls, the Sage Northcutt, the Paige Van Zandt, really all of them prospects, and then a lot of the sort of veterans a little bit lower on the card.
I got to say, though, some of the stuff that they were putting up during the broadcast today, pretty silly. They put up a little picture of Beyond the Octagon with some facts about Paige Van Zandt, fellas. And for people that didn't see it, this is some of the facts they had. How it relates to the fight, I'm not sure. Second place on Dancing with the Stars, Brazil commercial at age 13, modeled for Columbia Sportswear, nicknamed 12 Gauge, and the best fact of all, parents owned a dance studio. How about that? So that should play into it. But We'll discuss a little bit more about the fight a little bit later, but I think for me, the thing about it was I really wanted to see Uriah Faber versus Brad Pickett in 5 rounds. I felt like you want to give him those 2 extra rounds so he can try and maybe get his finish, have a bit of a nicer moment. And the other thing I did feel was when he did that post-fight speech, that kind of felt like the big moment of the night for me. And I agree with you, Elias. It did feel like the crowd sort of wandered off a little bit. But Casper, what did you think of the actual fight between Faber and Pickett? Faber obviously won the card pretty decisively. He had a lot of great moments. Pickett, sort of near the end of his run here, but was able to put up a good fight, had a couple of good moments himself. What did you think of this matchup?
I actually think Faber looked pretty good. From the get-go, I kind of saw this as a very winnable fight for him, but I thought, you know what? If he gets in this one sort of situation where he isn't able to initiate those scrambles and he can't take Brad Pickett down, I mean, he may have a tough night because Brad Pickett, he is a good striker. He does go down a lot, he does get hurt a lot, but essentially he is a good technical striker and he can bang. And Faber looked really good. He had good footwork. He dropped Pickett in the opening round. I actually think there is somewhat of an argument that you maybe could have stopped that fight. The way Pickett went down and the way he just kind of looked at Faber, sort of had his arm underneath him, was sort of defending himself. He was throwing these sort of kicks and he was trying to sort of regain composure. But I was almost a little bit surprised that the fight wasn't stopped. But all in all, I mean, it was 3 rounds of a dominating performance from Faber. This is sort of, when fighters look to retire, this is basically the fairy tale. It doesn't get any better than this. And very often, it doesn't happen like this. You get guys going out like, say, a Chuck Liddell, like, say, Nogueira, legends of the sport. And I think it's going to keep happening. There are a lot of guys that I'm eyeing in other divisions that I think are really close to retirement. And I don't think they're going to be retiring on their own terms like Uriah Faber did. But essentially, he performed as best as he has in a long time. Like in the last few fights, there were a lot of questions, He had that win over Francisco Rivera where people say, well, that was an eye poke. There was another fight, I think it was against Frankie Saenz, where people say, well, he sort of gassed out, he was getting tired. And then there was obviously the loss recently against Jimmy Rivera. And in this fight, it was a great fight because there was no question who won. So it was a good performance by him.
And I'm hoping that, Brad Pickett, who knows how much longer he's going to choose to fight for, but I'm hoping that if he does have his last fight, he gets a nice moment over in Europe after sort of facilitating a nice moment for Uriah in California, sort of taking a step back and being, I guess, the bad guy in Sacramento that night, and everybody wanted to see Uriah win. I hope he gets a nice moment in the UK as well. He gets to retire if that's what he chooses to do. But at least let's talk about this co-main event between Mickey Gall and Sage Northcutt. You mentioned it before. To me, the endearing fact about Sage here was we saw him do a little bit of trash talking, which to me proved that, okay, this guy is not an alien. This is a real human being, and he just doesn't have stock answers that just someone presses a button when you ask him a question, and it's the same thing followed by a sir. What did you think of the matchup? What was your takeaway from Sage Northcutt? Because a lot of people are saying, and this is just a lot of hearsay on social media, a lot of people coming away from it saying that when Sage gets in trouble, he may have a tendency to sort of give up or quit. What were your thoughts on the fight and that kind of sentiment that's going around the internet?
Well, I think that's a bit simplistic. I don't think people realize how good Mickey Gall is on the ground. I was just watching a match of his a year ago with Gordon Ryan. Submission grappling and jiu-jitsu heads. No, Gordon Ryan is one of John Danaher's death squad members. He's phenomenal, and he focuses completely on submission grappling. And Mickey Gall and him, went to a decision. There was no submissions. Mickey Gall is phenomenal at what he does. He trains under David Adib, who's an underground legend in jiu-jitsu. So that choke is, it was on. And he did some interesting things with extending out his legs, his hips, and then angling the neck and up and out in a way. It was a little bit different, but the choke was in. So, listen, he was caught. The problem is that he gets caught by people that he's fighting pretty often. I think this is his second submission loss in about a year or so. Sage Northcutt is being pushed too quickly. I won't reveal too much, but I know that before his fight to, I believe it was Barberina, he fought about 2 months prior to that, and he won that fight, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys. After that fight, I heard a conversation between some members of people close to Sage as he was on the stage getting ready for the post-fight press conference, and they were discussing the next moves, and there was talk about Sage going on to fight next in the card that he ultimately would, I believe. It was a quick turnaround, and one person cautioned another in that inner circle to not do that fight, and let's take it easy, and let's have Sage have time in between fights to learn and get better and not burn out. And that was not the direction they went. They went ahead with that fight. They lost it. I mean, listen, Sage is very young. He has a big upside, especially on the feet. But the kid trains at a gym by his own admission where he doesn't have fighters, doesn't do MMA sparring. The brief times he's gone to real MMA gyms, he leaves quickly for whatever reason. He's been at home and sheltered, it would seem, most of his life, being like a homeschool kid. Like they're taking him from like the womb and throwing him out into the world and pushing him really fast. And without talking about too much about areas I don't know about psychologically and in his life and his family, he certainly doesn't have the skills to be going out there and dominating everyone. Like, if this kid's going to lose every 6 months, that's bad career management. It doesn't mean he's a bad fighter. It doesn't mean he's a quitter. I just don't think he's getting the preparation he needs, and I think he's being pushed way too fast considering the preparation he's getting. So I like Sage Northcutt. I think it's a shame that, him doing a normal thing seems so out of place because he's on some weird script most of the time, like you guys are saying. But I like him. But yeah, he's being pushed way too fast. I have no idea why his father, whoever his other coaches are, allowed him to fight Mickey Gall. That was stupid from many levels. Most especially because Mickey Gall is in a weight class above him. That would have been the easiest challenge to turn away and say, hey, yeah, that's nice, Mickey. Why don't you challenge people in your own weight class? Or if you want to be a tough guy and beat up on a younger kid, come down to our weight class. That would have been the easiest thing to do. Instead, they went for it. And again, now his confidence is going to take a big hit. If he's losing every few months, that's going to affect a young fighter. That's just bad career management.
And I'm hoping that this loss sort of opens his eyes up to the fact that he is getting pushed a bit too quickly. Take that time in between fights, get around to those gyms, and really sort of take your time. Because, I mean, like he said, if he does lose every 6 months, I mean, eventually, if he loses a few fights back to back, there he goes from the UFC at a young age, and then he has to regroup and come back. So it's never a great thing when you get pushed too early. And I mean, we deal with this locally with Jake Matthews. He's had some issues as well, training with his dad here in Melbourne, and they have a great training camp as well. But it's about getting out there, getting that experience, and trying not to push things too quickly. But Casper, speaking of what's next for Mickey Gall, I mean, after the interview, he never disappoints. Gave us a couple of little scoops. One, that he wants to move down to lightweight. And number two is that he wants Dan Hardy. What were your thoughts on that? And do you want to see a Dan Hardy-Mickey Gall matchup next?
I'm actually pretty impressed. I mean, Elias, you spoke about how he's calling out this young, inexperienced guy in Sage Northcutt in a weight class, below him. And here he is calling out a guy like Dan Hardy. All right, granted, he has been retired and has been retired for a while, but he's been talking for a long time about coming back and, entering the sport. You've got legitimate UFC veterans calling out Dan Hardy, guys like Kevin Lee, and then you've got this guy, Mickey Gall, who literally just had his fourth or fifth pro fight, I'm not sure, one or the other. He's essentially developing before our very eyes, has a lot of deficiencies in his striking, and here he is calling out a guy like Dan Hardy, who is a striker, who is a big guy, and he wants to go down to lightweight. So from a career management perspective, I think it's very good. He's calling out a name, and a guy that, I mean, look, if he takes him down, I think he can definitely have a lot of advantages, but Dan Hardy's a veteran who, he's got championship experience. He's gone up against George St. Pierre. I think it's actually a pretty ballsy move. And if he does go down to lightweight, I mean, he stands 6'2". I don't know what that weight cut is going to be like for him, but that could open up a lot of advantages for him. I'm curious what you think, though, Elias, about this Dan Hardy call-out as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was impressed as well. It's definitely out of the norm for Mickey Gall call-outs, right? Like, he's definitely punching up in weight. Yeah, I mean, my feeling is basically this. If they fight, he'd better hope that Dan Hardy has a tough weight cut or that Dan Hardy got old, because that's a bad – like, Dan Hardy in his prime, I think Mickey Gall is going to struggle for the takedown, and I think he will probably not be able to submit him. So if Dan Hardy is anywhere near his prime, he's going to be tough in the areas where Mickey Gall excels at, and he's way better on the feet. So that's a very, very challenging fight that Mickey Gall just put on his plate. So props to him.
Dan Hardy tweeting out, was he old enough to watch the UFC when I was still fighting? Smiling face with the tears coming out the eyes. What does that mean? Who knows? But if the fight does come together, it'll be interesting. You know, what I like about Gal is the fact that he's just going from name to name, hoping that a little bit of that rubs off on him each time, and then eventually hoping to make it to the top. But yeah, Dan Hardy's a tough one. And I think the big gap for me when I was watching this fight today was the fact that Gal still has a little bit of work to put into his striking. Even though it's coming along, we saw Sage was able to, there were a few holes there, and I'm wondering if he'd be able to take Dan Hardy down like you mentioned, Elias. But let's talk about the main event, Michelle Waterson versus Paige VanZant. I'm not talking about the dance-off, and I'll go on officially on record and say that I think Paige may have won the dance-off. But the actual fight that just happened, I mean, Waterson was able to defeat Paige via rear naked choke. Elias, I'm wondering, I mean, Paige has always sort of seemed playful and sort of fun when she gets into the ring. But when I looked at Michelle and the stuff that was going on before her eyes, she looked like she was ready to go when she stepped into that octagon. I mean, what did you think about this matchup and what she was able to do to Paige?
Yeah, it's funny. I was watching it with the fights with my wife and my dad. My dad was saying the same thing about the kind of the differences in their demeanor. And yeah, I think in terms of what she was able to do, I was very, very, very impressed. Michelle Waterson came off of a very long layoff, off of injuries, off of at least one surgery, and she looked phenomenal. The big stage doesn't daunt her. She's focused. She's mean, and technically, she did a great job with her timing. That she shucked off a head and arm toss. I hate those tosses, mostly because I'm not good at them, but I hate them. I think they're so easy to take the back. She shucked it off, went to the back, and then got her own with amazing timing. And then, most impressively, she held Paige down. She kept her there. She transitioned. When Paige started scrambling, you could tell she was ready because she went, cut the corner, took the back. I mean, just even with the hand fighting, Paige was fighting the hands pretty well. When Michelle initially got the choke in really deep, she had to make an adjustment. I thought the adjustment was going to kill her timing and she was going to lose the neck. She didn't. Like, she was on point with her grappling, which was very impressive. You know, she's so good grappling in the past. I didn't realize it was that good because it's really hard to finish strong-willed people. And Paige VanZant is nothing if not that. I mean, she went to sleep. She didn't even tap out, right? Talk about being strong-willed. Someone's choking the life out of you. You don't even consider giving in a sporting context. You're tough. It's really hard to control someone. That's why, you know, especially with these fights go to decisions, people scramble up. It's hard to get submission finishes. And she did it cleanly and slickly, really, really fast. So that's a whole nother element to someone who's known for her karate and for her Muay Thai for the most part. Very impressive for Michelle Waterson. I don't have a relationship with either one of these. I've never even interviewed either one, I don't think. But I'm really happy for her just because she'd only had, I think, one UFC fight prior. She's a former world champion that I think 9 out of 10 people don't even know that about her. So for her to have this stage and to do so well, very impressive. Of course, you know, I would have felt, you know, similarly happy for Paige VanZant. She pulled it off, but at least she's actually at least had more introduction to the world for UFC main events before. She's obviously was on Dancing with the Stars. So you got to be happy for Michelle Waterson. And, you know, if she can do that to Paige VanZant, you got to think she's ready for title contention. Rose Namajunas is basically, as far as I'm concerned, up there in like top 3 or 4 in the division. And she beat up Paige, but it took her a long time. If someone can take out Paige VanZant that quickly, they're got to be considered a top contender.
Yeah, and you know what? She was the biggest winner of the night for me because I think she really benefited. She was in the main event. I mean, all eyes were on her, and I think a lot of people even forgot that she was in the UFC. She's been away for a year and a half, so a huge moment for her, and her stock just rose very, very quickly after tonight. Casper, what do you think should be next for Waterson? I mean, she got the mic, and she gave the answer, whatever the UFC gives me, I'm happy with, which, you know, we're not too happy about. Give a name, damn it. But that's okay. She's a nice person, and she uses Samsung phones, which means she's a friend of ours. What do you think should be next for her?
Well, you said it before when you said Rose, and I mean, Elias alluded to it before. Actually, Elias essentially broke it down. I miss seeing Rose Namajunas fight. I think she needs to get back in there, and I think Michelle Waterson is a good opponent. I think when you consider the stage that she just won on, Michelle Waterson, and considering how Paige VanZant had so much hype behind her. I mean, you look at the main card. There was an entire interview that we watched for Paige Van Zandt that we had to sit through. And there was all these promos about Paige Van Zandt this and Paige Van Zandt that. And listen, I have nothing against that. The UFC are going to push who they want to push, and that's fair enough. But in some ways, they backed the wrong horse. And now that Michelle Waterson won, she takes that rub. She takes the momentum. And given that she won in the main event, I think she needs to win. She needs to fight someone big, and they need to sort of thrust her forward. I think she's sort of been on the sidelines for so long. I don't think she really wants to sit around and sort of climb her way back up. She wants to make up for lost time. And if you put her up against Rose Namajunas, look, you could do Tisha Torres. You could go back to the well and make the fight that was originally supposed to happen a while back and that sort of saw her sit on the sidelines for a while. But I think you thrust her up. I think you give her a fight against Rose. And I mean, the strawweight division, it's a little bit, I guess, needing in terms of future contenders. You've got Andrade, who I think is a clear next contender for the belt if she can win her next fight, and then afterwards there's a bit of a drop-off. So you need to sort of start investing and planting those seeds now, and I think if you wait a few months and you book Rose Namajunas versus Michelle Waterson, and that's a few months down the track, hopefully you'll have an ex-contender by the time the title picture clears up.
And Andrade is fighting TBD at the moment. I wonder if their parents own a dance studio as well. But let's talk about the Christmas gifts, guys. I mean, this is really what we came on to talk about. Now, Elias, we had some people on the show this week. We had guys like John Morgan. We had a lot of people really discussing, Robin Black, for example. We had people discussing these gifts. I mean, Sean Sheehan all the way from Ireland spoke to us about this. And we're at the end of our road now, last episode of the year, and you're the final man we're going to ask. So the two big questions here, my friend, what is the best Christmas present you've ever given and the best Christmas present you've ever received?
And it doesn't have to be Christmas, because we know that people celebrate all sorts of different things. So any holiday present.
Festivus, Hanukkah, whatever it is.
Kwanzaa.
So you guys practice that? You said Kwanzaa at the same time.
This is all live, baby.
Dana White tonight, you were telling us what to say.
Yeah.
Said, say Kwanzaa, damn
it. Let's see. So it's hard. Both of these are very hard to say, but it's very fun. I think the gifts I've gotten from my wife in the last few years, they probably have an edge over every other one. So she gets automatic first place. But beyond that, something that comes to mind was when I was a little kid, there was Nintendo and all that out. You guys are, I think, about 25, 30 years younger than me, so this may be before your time. But
come on.
They had Nintendo, and I never had Nintendo as a kid. Like all my cousins did. My parents weren't like militantly against it. Like I could play with other kids and stuff, but I never had a system. For me, at my age, I was relatively late. I was like the only kid at my school, which tells you, I guess, about how lucky I guess we were that everyone else had a system. But everyone else had a video game system. I never had one. I never thought I was going to get one either. Like they had rules about how much television to watch, all this type of stuff. And then one Christmas, I was 9 years old, I think. It was in it was December '92. That's about right. So yeah, I just turned 9. I opened up and I got a Sega Genesis. So I never had Nintendo like my cousins. They would always tease me for not having Nintendo. Then all of a sudden I got a relatively new system that no one else had. I called up my cousin, my best friend, and told him I got it, and he hung up on me. He thought I was messing with him. So that was
because he was running to your house to play with it, right?
Yeah. For years later, then everyone else caught up later. So that was a fun one. That was a truly, truly shocking gift. My parents always are good at gifts, but that was a really shocking one. So that was a lot of fun. That one stands out for me. In terms of ones I've given, I'm not that great of a gift giver. I don't think I did this. I don't know if I gave this on. We do celebrate Christmas. I don't know if I gave this on Christmas or not. I might have, but I did. It was a pretty slick thing. I did plan and kind of gift to my wife, but also to me, because I'm a selfish guy. So all the gifts help me out as well. But like a kind of spur of the moment trip to New Orleans for our anniversary, and that ended up being a lot of fun. We'd never been down there in Louisiana here in the States, and that ended up being a really good trip. So that wasn't a bad gift. I think my wife might agree that was halfway decent.
Wow. You know, it's funny how you mentioned me and Casper said Kwanzaa at the same time, because listen to this. Maybe there's someone in our earpiece with you and me, Elias. When I'm talking about my best gift, and I mean, I've spoken about this in interviews before, but I'll go into a little bit of detail in it. Same situation as you. A few years later, strict family, no gaming system. I'm from Ukraine. I live in Australia. I wear these weird socks. Everyone's making fun of me, saying I wear stockings. And old Milosh with a cheese sandwich. I would literally get a cheese sandwich, or people got like nice meat pies and money to go get like nice food, and no one wanted to trade with the guy with a cheese sandwich and no system. So one morning when I woke up, I snuck through and I saw it was a Nintendo 64, 2 controllers with a see-through controller, and we were pretty poor back then because we were new to the country. I was expecting a Lego police station. I didn't want to like shit on it, but I was all like, fuck Lego and fuck the police. And so anyway, I ended up opening up and I got it. But here's the funny part of the story, because we were super poor and we had no money. My mom didn't actually get me a game. So I would actually sit around and I would read the box on the back. I would read the manual. And I think like I was able to go to the store and like borrow a game for 3 days. Eventually I did get a game, but there you go. That's awesome. One there. And then, in terms of the best gift I've ever given, I mean, this is a selfish. I'm much like you, Liz. This is why we're so good at the buffet together. Me and Ash, my girlfriend, actually decided last year not to get each other gifts and just to get a big screen TV, which is awesome. And I went. Long story short, I went up on Boxing Day, which is the big sale down here in Melbourne. I went and I got the TV, opened it up, put it on, and then Winston, my dog, ended up eating the cord, and the thing blew up, right? The thing blew up because the cord was stuffed, and it actually legitimately blew near my hand. I realized they gave me the wrong TV as well from the 1 year back, so quickly called him up. Hey, you guys gave me the wrong TV. I pretended to be real angry about it. Dana White, if I got canceled last minute, and I don't know. So like I spoke to him like Nate Marquardt, where he pulled out last minute out of that UFC card, and Dana White wasn't very happy about it, and ran up there. And it was so outraged. It was like, oh, humbug, how could this happen to us? That they didn't check the TV that I was returning, gave me the TV that I was supposed to get. And listen to this, guys. That was a huge screech out the front, burn marks as we just flew out of there. I threw my fake mustache and hat on the ground as I got out of there. Ocean's 11 moment successful. But Casper, what about you as we wrap up? What are your moments?
Holy shit, man. How do I top that? It's funny that you guys mentioned these gaming systems, because I'm not going to break the trend. I feel like we've all basically lived the same lives. And I'm wondering if anybody who's listening, or everybody who's listening, is just going to be in the comment section below like, yep, pretty much same thing, Sega Genesis or Nintendo 64 for Christmas. But yeah, essentially, much like you, Elias, really strict household, or at least on my mum's side. My dad was super relaxed. My mum was like, you can only watch 30 minutes of TV a day. You can't watch The Simpsons. You can't do this. You can't do that. Never had any gaming systems. And then my parents got divorced at age 7, which may have, career-wise, been the best move for me from a presence perspective. Because they obviously didn't have any reason to communicate anymore, and that worked to my advantage. So I remember coming to my dad's house over the weekend. I think I may have been 8, and let's just Tarantino this, right? A few months back, or a few weeks prior to this, there was this jar full of coins, mainly gold ones, $1 coins, $2 coins, but some silver. And I said to my dad, if there's enough money in here, can I get like a Nintendo 64? And this is at the time, I'm sure you remember this, Dennis, where Nintendo 64s and PS1s were always advertised for being $199. That was the hook. $199, $199. And I said, I reckon there's $199 here. If we have enough money, can we get it? My dad said, all right, cool, but there isn't going to be. And I'm like, I bet you there will be. So I counted all these coins, and there was a shitload of money in there. For what coins are, there was way more than $199. Anyway, the conversation died. I think my dad was like, fuck, now I got to buy it for him. A few weeks later, a few months later, I go up. It's the festive season, and guess what? Brand new Nintendo 64, complete with 1080 snowboarding. And I did not blink one. And much like you, the see-through controller, that kind of purpley looking see-through controller that everybody basically got, 2 controllers. I didn't blink that whole weekend. It was so good. Then, I think it was Monday night, I go back to my mum's house, fun times over, back to the Nazi stronghold of homework and other strict things, aka my mum's house. Surprisingly enough, My mum didn't get the memo that I was a brand new owner of a Nintendo 64, and so she got me a PlayStation 1, also 2 controllers. How about that? It was like a bonus of the night award for me. So yeah, that was pretty awesome. And then as far as the best gifts that I've ever given, I've got a few. I've got 3 because I'm actually a really good gift giver when I'm in the mood. And I hate giving gifts. I hate it. I lament it. I'm a selfish person, and I like the act of giving a gift. I don't like the act of thinking of what to get and shopping and all that kind of stuff because I'm very sentimental and I put a lot of pressure on these things. So all these gifts are basically for my girlfriend. I remember one time I got her a brand new Mac. She was at uni and she needed a new computer. So I saved up a bunch of money. I bought her like a over $2,000 computer, a brand new Mac. And I was a waiter at the time. This is years ago. So waiter salaries are shit all. And for me to spend over $2,000 was a crazy amount. Oh, and I got her some Chuck Taylors. Yeah, I know, right? Oh, and funny story about that. Years later, she left that computer and her shoes onto the roof of her car and drove off. So we joke about it to this day that somewhere there's a hobo wearing some awesome shoes and surfing Pornhub. So there you go. And then the number one gift that I've gotten for my girlfriend is basically because I didn't go out and actually buy her something and I didn't have a lot of money at the time. We've all seen that song "Dick in a Box." Well, suffice it to say, there's a box somewhere with a hole in it that my girlfriend at one point opened. So there you go. And the instructions are in the music video. So yeah. And I'm glad Elias is still here to listen to that story. I gave it to her, and then I gave it to her.
There you go. Wow.
I wonder where that ranks on her top gifts list, though. That's the question. We got to compare that.
Probably at the bottom.
Oh Lord! Wow. There you guys go. I feel like you're learning more and more about us each week. Now, Elias, as we wrap up, just quickly, I know a lot of people used to check out your work on Fox Sports. You do an amazing job now with Mike Dice on the Extra Rounds podcast, and you've done a few shows without him because I know Mike has been in and out and stuff. You guys do an amazing work over there at Fanside, and everybody needs to subscribe to the show right now and check it out weekly because it is amazing. But where else can they check you out and the stuff that you do?
Thanks so much. Appreciate that. Yeah, Mike will be back this coming week, so that'll be exciting. Yeah, I started up over at champions.co, new site. They've been around not too long. They're kind of a new vertical from a successful movie site, moviepilot.com. So they left the M out and they just have .co for whatever reason. But I do know we're producing some cool shit there, so that's fun. I'm writing there every week and all weekend as well, editing there as well. So champions.co, doing a bunch of stuff there in addition to the Extra Rounds podcast from Sports Illustrated and Fansided, and I also do a once weekly column over at the Underground, mixedmartialarts.com for Character Nest. So that's kind of fun. But yeah, the new thing is Champions, so I'm having a good time over there.
Yeah, and your work has been amazing. I've been checking it out, so everybody needs to jump on and check it out. And also make sure to follow Elias on Twitter at Elias Cepeda. You guys won't regret it. A lot of great work coming in. With UFC 207, I'm imagining some fun pieces coming out. So with that, guys, that is the end of the show and the final episode of Submission Radio for 2016. Big thanks to John Morgan, Sean Sheehan, Robin Black, Tommy Toehold for being a part of the episode, and of course, Elias Cepeda. We will be back next year. We spoke about this at the start of the show. If you just tune in now, we will be now on Wednesdays in America and Thursdays in Australia. A bit of fun there, but still a lot of Submission Radio goodness. Casper, before we go, any last words for the listeners at home?
Just a big thank you. That's all I want to say. A massive thank you to all the guests that we've had over this year, all our media friends such as yourself, Elias, and all the awesome people that we've had the pleasure and honor of doing buffets with at these international events like UFC 205, UFC 202, the massive hellacious week of International Fight Week and UFC 200, and probably the biggest, actually without a shadow of a doubt, the biggest thank you is to the listeners, to you guys listening right now, for commenting, for subscribing, for dropping all those iTunes reviews, and even if you never did any of those things, just for listening, just for tuning in every week and hopefully enjoying the sound of our silky smooth voices.
That's right, guys. So until then, we will be back next year, bigger, badder, and faster. Until then, have a great Christmas, a great holiday, Kwanzaa, Festivus, Hanukkah, whatever it is you guys celebrate. We hope you have a great one and also a great New Year, and we'll see you in 2017.